I was reborn into the world of Jujutsu Kaisen as an ordinary, albeit ridiculously handsome civilian. No cursed energy, no prominent clan, just a normal guy trying to study and survive. But I had two massive secrets. First, I knew the plot, and the absolute meat grinder this world was about to become. Second, my secret girlfriend was Maki Zenin. The problem? Good looks and perfect grades don't kill special grade curses. Just as the canon timeline begins and danger finally knocks on our door, a cold voice echoes in my mind. The partner synchronization system has awakened. Bond detected, Maki Zenin. Affection level, max. Extracting and amplifying partner's traits. Granted, heavenly restriction, half, and master level weaponry. Harem, Maki Zenin, Mai, and I, DK. Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in JJK and Maki is My Lover, Harem, Part 1. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
The late afternoon sun warmed the living room. Ren sat leaning back on the low green sofa. Maki sat straddled across his lap. She had showed up at his door 20 minutes ago, dropping a long, heavy case in the hallway before practically collapsing onto him. She looked down at him, her eyebrows pulled together, and her fingers poked lightly at his ribs through his shirt. "You lost weight," Maki said. Her voice was flat, but she was looking at him closely. "Are you actually eating when I'm not here? Or are you just living off instant ramen again?" Ren let out a short laugh. His hands rested on her waist, his thumbs rubbing the soft fabric of her shirt. "Eat fine, Maki. I just get lazy with cooking when my girlfriend disappears for an entire month." He meant it as a joke, but Maki's shoulders dropped. She leaned her weight against him, bringing her face closer. The faint smell of cheap medical tape hung around her, and he could see a fresh, thin scrape on her jaw that she hadn't completely covered up. "I know," she muttered, her voice dropping. "I'm sorry." "Hey, I'm just messing with you," Ren said. "I know, but still." She looked down at his chest, tracing a small circle on his shirt with her thumb. "My boarding school has been insane lately. The teachers keep piling on extra work, and my track practices have been running late. They don't let us leave campus much right now. I really didn't mean to stay away this long." Ren kept his expression perfectly calm. Track practice, right? He knew exactly what she was actually doing. She was out fighting curses, dealing with insane sorcerer training, and surviving the meat grinder of the jujutsu world. She lied to keep him out of it, treating him like a normal guy who needed to be protected from the dark side of the city. He let her keep the secret. "You don't have to apologize for being busy," Ren said. He moved his right hand up from her waist and cupped the side of her face, his thumb carefully avoiding the scrape on her jaw. "Just make sure you don't overwork yourself. I don't want you passing out on me." Maki smiled. It was a real, quiet smile. "I don't pass out," she said softly. "Sure you don't," Ren replied. Maki let out a soft breath and finally closed the distance. Her lips pressed against his, slow and familiar. Ren pulled her closer by the waist, letting her settle her full weight against him. She slid her hands up from his chest and wrapped them around the back of his neck, her fingers catching in his hair as the kiss deepened. The apartment was quiet, but in the back of his mind, Ren knew her excuses wouldn't work forever. The Shibuya incident was getting closer. He couldn't play the clueless civilian forever. Maki pulled back just enough to break the kiss. She kept her arms loosely around his neck, but her eyes were watching him closely. "When I was walking up to your building," she said, trying to make her voice sound casual, "I saw a couple of girls from your high school hanging around the lobby. They were staring at your window." Ren raised an eyebrow. A slow smirk crossed his face. Obviously. Maki narrowed her eyes slightly. Obviously. Yeah, Rin said smoothly. I have a line of girls proposing to me every single day. Maki scoffed, though the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. Oh, really? A whole line? Every day? Rin repeated. He shifted his hands from her waist, sliding them up her sides. And here I was, turning down all those proposals, just sitting around waiting for you to finally get out of track practice. Maki let out a quiet laugh, the last bit of tension leaving her shoulders. You're an idiot. I'm your idiot, Rin said. He didn't give her a chance to reply. He leaned forward, pressing a warm kiss to the pulse point just beneath her jaw. Maki let out a sharp, quiet breath. Rin moved lower, trailing a few slow kisses down the side of her neck. Her hands tightened in his hair, pulling him a little closer. Before she could get comfortable, Rin shifted his weight. He tightened his grip on her waist and smoothly rolled to the side, taking her with him. Maki let out a short gasp of surprise as her back hit the soft cushions of the sofa. The positions suddenly flipped. Rin settled over her, bracing his arms on either side of her head so he wouldn't crush her. He looked down at her, the teasing smirk still on his face. Maki looked up at him, her chest rising and falling a little faster now. She didn't look like a hardened fighter right now. She just looked like a girl who was precisely where she wanted to be. Maki's breath caught for a second, her amber eyes wide as she looked up at him. But just as Rin leaned in again, her expression shifted. Her hands slid from the back of his neck down to his chest, her palms pressing flat against his collarbone. She didn't push hard, barely an ounce of pressure, but it was enough to create a firm, unmistakable boundary. Wait, Maki said, her voice a little breathless but steadying quickly. She turned her head slightly, avoiding his gaze. Hold on, idiot. Rin paused, his teasing smirk softening into something more patient. He held his weight above her, not pushing forward. What's wrong? The line of proposals outside making you jealous? Maki let out a short, forced laugh, but the tension had returned to her shoulders. No, I'm exhausted, Rain. Seriously. She looked back up at him, masking the deep, underlying hesitation in her eyes with a tired scowl. Coach ran us into the ground today. My muscles are cramping up, and I haven't slept properly in days. If we do this now, I'm probably going to fall asleep halfway through and crush you. She framed it as a joke about being tired and heavy, but Rin heard exactly what she wasn't saying. He knew the truth. She wasn't worried about falling asleep. She was terrified of her own strength. Because of her heavenly restriction, Maki's body was a literal weapon, possessing superhuman power that she constantly had to keep tightly leashed around him. In a moment of passion, a loss of control, a sudden tight embrace, she genuinely believed she could snap his ribs or accidentally crush him. To her, he was just a fragile, everyday civilian who didn't know the first thing about fighting. That unspoken fear was the real reason they hadn't gone all the way yet. Rin wasn't stupid. You don't date a girl like Maki and casually pass up the chance to be with her. But he understood the deep-seated anxiety it caused her, the absolute dread she felt at the thought of hurting the one normal, safe thing in her life. Till he could finally drop his act and show her he wasn't as fragile as she thought, he was perfectly fine with waiting. He wasn't going to push her into a panic just to lose his virginity. Rin let out an exaggerated, dramatic sigh. He smoothly pushed himself up and shifted his weight entirely off her, dropping onto his back next to her on the sofa. He threw an arm over his eyes. Tragic, Rin deadpanned, staring at the ceiling. Absolutely tragic. Defeated by a phantom track coach. My ego is shattered. Maki let out a long, quiet exhale that sounded suspiciously like sheer relief. The rigid stiffness in her posture melted away. She turned on her side, carefully resting her head on his chest and throwing one arm lightly across his stomach. Even now, she was so incredibly careful to keep her muscles entirely relaxed against him. "Shut up," she mumbled, closing her eyes. "I'll make it up to you later. I promise." "You're making it up to me right now," Rin corrected, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her comfortably against his side. "You're going to cook us dinner, since you were just complaining about me living off instant ramen." Maki let out a soft huff of amusement, her fingers lightly gripping his shirt. "Fine." She pushed herself up from his chest with agonizingly slow movements, instinctively ensuring she didn't put too much pressure on his ribs. She stretched her arms above her head, her spine popping satisfyingly, before turning toward the small kitchen attached to the living room. "If all you have in this fridge is expired milk and mystery leftovers, I'm tossing you out the window," she called over her shoulder, her tone light and teasing, a stark contrast to the heavy exhaustion she carried in with her. "Second shelf on the left," Rin replied, shifting on the couch to watch her go. "I bought fresh groceries yesterday. I'm not a complete savage." As Maki disappeared behind the kitchen island, the sound of the fridge door opening echoing in the quiet apartment, Rin let out a slow, silent breath. His relaxed, easygoing posture faded just a fraction. He stared at the hallway where her heavy weapon case sat. He couldn't stay on the sidelines playing the clueless boyfriend forever. Soon he would have to show his hand. He just needed to figure out how. "Blink." Rin frowned, rubbing his eyes. A faint, static-like hum suddenly vibrated at the base of his skull. "Blink." Without warning, the warm afternoon light in the living room seemed to artificially dim. The air in the apartment grew unnaturally cold, suddenly dense with an invisible, suffocating pressure that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Right in the dead center of his vision, a sharp, glowing blue interface materialized out of thin air. It wasn't a trick of the light, nor was it cursed energy. It was a perfectly crisp, floating holographic panel that tracked seamlessly with his eye movements. Ren froze, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at the glowing text typing itself across the translucent screen in real time. "System initialization complete." Ren stared at the glowing words, his mind completely blanking. "System initialization?" He blinked hard, but the translucent blue panel stayed locked in the center of his vision, hovering just above the coffee table. Before he could even begin to process the floating text, the fridge door clicked shut. "Actually," Maki's voice drifted over from the kitchen, breaking through the unnatural, static pressure in the room. She stepped back into the living room, brushing past the island and heading toward the short hallway that led to his bedroom. "I'm going to change first. Then I'll make something." Ren forcefully dragged his focus away from the floating text. He swallowed the sudden dryness in his throat and forced his posture to remain relaxed, leaning back into the sofa cushions. He had to play it cool. If she noticed him freaking out over something invisible, her sorcerer instincts would instantly kick into high gear. "You brought clothes?" Ren asked, his voice miraculously steady. He cast a pointed look toward the front hallway. "Unless you've got a hoodie stuffed inside that heavy track case of yours, you came in empty-handed." Maki stopped right at his bedroom door. She leaned against the frame and looked back at him, her amber eyes completely flat. "No," she said simply. Ren raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you planning on wearing?" Maki let out a soft scoff, looking at him like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "What do you think your clothes are here for?" With that, she disappeared into his bedroom, the door clicking shut behind her. Ren was left alone in the quiet living room, the faint sounds of Maki rummaging through his dresser echoing through the wall. He slowly let out the breath he had been holding. His gaze drifted back to the dead center of the room, right where the cold, artificial light continued to hum. The screen was still there, waiting for him. "System initialization complete." Ren stared at the floating blue panel, half expecting it to vanish the second he blinked. Didn't. Instead, the words "system initialization complete" dissolved into a shower of digital sparks, immediately replaced by a cascading list of neatly organized data. It looked exactly like a status screen from a role-playing game. User status: name Rin, age 17, cursed energy level civilian, cursed technique none, heavenly restriction none, unique trait preternaturally handsome. Ren let out a silent, bewildered breath. He read the last line twice. Preternaturally handsome? Really? That's my unique trait? Not hyperintelligence or a secret hidden power. Just a good face? It certainly explained the daily proposals at school, but it wasn't exactly going to help him survive a special grade curse. Before he could dwell on the absolute absurdity of his unique trait, the blue panel flashed. A sharp, distinct ping echoed in his mind, and a new window materialized over his status screen. Core ability unlocked. Inheritance via intimacy. Description: the user possesses the unique ability to permanently copy and assimilate the innate cursed techniques, cursed energy traits, or heavenly restrictions of others. Condition for activation: the user must engage in the deepest act of physical intimacy, intercourse, with the target. Note: this process does not steal or weaken the partner's abilities in any way. It is a perfect, harmless replication. Reinforce. He read the glowing text once, twice, and then a third time just to make sure his brain hadn't completely short-circuited. Wait, hold on. He blinked hard, his eyes wide. To get stronger, I just have to sleep with them? That's the condition? It was completely insane. He had spent months agonizing over how he was going to survive the impending disaster of the Jujutsu world, how he could protect Maki without letting her know he possessed meta-knowledge of her universe. And the universe's solution was a literal cheat code tied to his sex life. The system wasn't done. Another smaller notification popped up, its light reflecting faintly in Ren's dark eyes. Nearby entity detected. Maki Zenin. Affection level. Maximum/devoted. Potential acquisition. Heavenly restriction. Physical gift. Current status: incomplete. Half. System notice: because the target's heavenly restriction is currently incomplete, the user will only inherit the half version of the physical enhancement upon fulfilling the intimacy condition. To acquire a fully realized heavenly restriction, the target's own restriction must first be completed. Ren leaned back against the sofa, his mind racing as the glowing text hung in the air. He knew exactly why Maki's heavenly restriction was incomplete. It was because of her twin sister, Mai. Until that tragic knot was untangled, Maki was capped at superhuman, but not Toji Fushiguro levels of superhuman. Inheriting a half-heavenly restriction wouldn't make him a god, but it would instantly elevate him from a fragile civilian to someone capable of throwing a car. Don't know about seeing curses without glasses, though, and actually fighting back. A sudden, sharp thud from the bedroom snapped him out of his thoughts. Reim! Maki called out through the wall, her voice muffled but distinctly annoyed. Why do you own 4 identical black shirts? Which one is the clean one? They're all clean, Ren called back automatically, waving his hand. Surprisingly, the blue screens instantly minimized and vanished at the gesture, leaving the living room looking entirely normal again. Ren rubbed his temples, a slow, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. The bedroom door clicked open, saving Ren from his spiraling thoughts. He looked up and immediately forgot how to breathe. A sharp, cold breath hitched in his throat, his brain momentarily short-circuiting all over again, this time entirely without the system's help. Maki stepped into the hallway, casually adjusting the collar of her new outfit. She had selected one of his black t-shirts, but on her it looked entirely different. The dark fabric draped loosely over her athletic shoulders and clung subtly to her chest, the oversized hem falling down past her hips. Beneath it, She had thrown on a pair of impossibly tiny black athletic shorts, presumably the only casual clothing she had actually managed to stash in her heavy weapons case. The combination was devastatingly simple. The oversized shirt swallowed her upper half, but the shorts left her long, powerfully toned legs completely bare. Her dark green hair was slightly tousled from pulling the shirt over her head, framing her sharp, beautiful features perfectly. She looked relaxed. She looked effortlessly dominant, and she looked incredibly, unfairly hot. Maki caught him staring. She paused in the center of the living room, resting a hand on her hip. Her amber eyes locked onto his, and a slow, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "What?" she asked, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, thick with a lazy sort of amusement. "Didn't think I could pull off your incredibly boring wardrobe?" Rin swallowed hard, acutely aware of the faint scent of his own laundry detergent mixing with her warm, natural scent as she stepped closer. Rin forced his brain to reboot. Maki was standing there, radiating an effortless, dangerous kind of confidence, waiting for him to crumble. And normally he would. "Actually," Rin said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave to match hers. He pushed himself up from the sofa and slowly closed the distance between them. Maki held her ground, but her smirk faltered just a millimeter as he stopped right in front of her. He reached out, his fingers brushing featherlight against her collarbone as he gently tugged the collar of the oversized shirt to straighten it. "I was just thinking," Rin murmured, looking directly into her amber eyes with a soft, entirely sincere smile, "that I'm definitely never getting this shirt back, and honestly, you make it look way too good for me to even mind." Maki froze. For a split second, the fearsome, unshakable Maki completely short-circuited. A furious, bright crimson flush erupted across her cheeks, traveling with lightning speed all the way to the tips of her ears. Her eyes widened, completely stripped of their teasing dominance. She quickly slapped his hand away, though there was absolutely zero force behind the strike. "Idiot," she muttered, aggressively turning her head away to hide her face, though the deep red of her ears gave her away entirely. She cleared her throat, her voice suddenly an octave higher. "Come on, let's just make the damn food." Ren hid a triumphant grin and followed her to the kitchen. The tension easily melted into a comfortable, familiar rhythm. They moved around the small kitchen together, seamlessly working around each other. Ren handled the prep, slicing green onions, mushrooms, and pork, while Maki commandeered the stove. She fiercely watched over a simmering pot of broth and noodles, arms crossed, glaring at the boiling water as if it were a curse trying to escape. Her face was still dusted with a faint pink, but she barked out domestic orders with her usual bossy affection. Once the steaming bowls were filled, they carried them over to the low wooden coffee table in the living room. They sat cross-legged on the floor, the scent of rich broth filling the air. Before picking up his chopsticks, Run reached over and grabbed the TV remote. Maki practically growled around her chopstick. "Reim, put it down. You know the rule, no screens while eating. Focus on your food. It's just background noise," Rin argued, smoothly dodging her attempt to swat his hand and hitting the power button anyway. "I need visual stimulation to fully appreciate your culinary genius." "My cooking stands on its own, you brat." The TV flickered to life, cutting her off. The screen displayed a very serious-looking news anchor sitting at a desk. Authorities are still investigating the series of unexplained structural collapses near the Kawasaki district, the anchor reported grimly. Officials are currently ruling it as a massive, synchronized underground gas pipe failure, though the bizarre, twisted state of the steel beams has left many residents questioning the official statement. Ren's eyes narrowed slightly. A gas leak, the universal Jujutsu cover-up. Given the timeline, right in the middle of the Tokyo students' 2-month training block before the Goodwill event, while Yuji Itadori was supposed to be dead, It was almost certainly a cursed spirit rampage. Maybe even one of Mahito's early, gruesome experiments in the city. Maki's posture instantly stiffened. The warm, relaxed aura she had carefully built up over the last 20 minutes vanished. She hated it when the morbid reality of jujutsu sorcery followed her into Ren's apartment. This was supposed to be their safe haven. "Give me that," she snapped, snatching the remote right out of his hand before he could protest. "I didn't come over to listen to depressing bureaucratic cover-ups." Without looking at the screen, she aggressively mashed the Channel Up button. The screen flashed black for a second. The grim news anchor vanished. Instead, the screen filled with a tight, high-definition close-up of two actors deeply entangled in a rain-soaked, incredibly passionate kiss. The background music was a sweeping, dramatic orchestral swell. A very heavy, breathy sound echoed from the TV speakers as the male actor pinned the woman against a wall. "Oh, Takashi." The actress on screen breathed heavily, her hands desperately pulling the man's shirt off his shoulders. "Don't stop, please." The silence in the living room was deafening. Ren slowly lowered his chopsticks, his eyes locked on the screen as the actors practically swallowed each other whole. Maki sat completely paralyzed. The remote slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly onto the wooden coffee table. The bright red flush from earlier returned with an absolute vengeance, completely consuming her face, neck, and chest. Ren swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat returning as his mind viciously betrayed him. Neither of them moved to pick up the remote. The dramatic, swelling string instruments from the TV filled the suffocating silence of the living room, punctuated by another breathy, scandalous gasp from the actress on screen. Ren dragged his gaze away from the high-definition kissing. He swallowed hard, nervously shifting his weight on the floor cushions. He risked a side glance at Maki. She was still completely petrified, staring rigidly at the bowl of noodles in front of her as if trying to set the broth on fire with her mind. The furious blush had reached the very tips of her ears and was rapidly migrating down her neck. Ren cleared his throat, the sound barely audible over the TV. He shifted again, leaning just a fraction of an inch closer to her. Their shoulders were almost brushing. "Hey," he muttered, his voice dropping low. Maki jolted slightly, her posture going ramrod straight. "What?" she snapped, though her voice wavered dangerously, lacking its usual lethal edge. She adamantly refused to look at him or the TV. Ren leaned in just a little bit more, his dark eyes studying the side of her flushed face. "How long has it been exactly?" he asked softly. "Since we actually made this official?" That finally got her to look at him. Maki turned her head, her amber eyes wide and completely bewildered. "Huh? How long since what? Why the hell are you asking that now?" "Just thinking about it," Ren replied, a small, genuine smile breaking through his own nervousness. His mind drifted back to the very beginning. It had been spring of last year. Maki had only been enrolled at Tokyo Jujutsu High for maybe a month or two. She was younger, angrier, and constantly covered in fresh, ugly bruises from her brutal training sessions and her family's relentless prejudice. She had stomped into the quiet little coffee shop near the station where Ren was working part-time, looking like she was ready to murder the first person who looked at her wrong. She had practically slammed her money on the counter and demanded the strongest black coffee they had. Anyone else would have been terrified. But Ren, protected by a mix of civilian ignorance and his own stubborn nature, hadn't flinched. He had just looked at her battered knuckles, calmly brewed her drink, and slid a complimentary chocolate pastry across the counter with a completely straight face, telling her that sugar was better for healing. She had glared at him like he was an alien, but a week later she came back, then again, and again. Their weird, abrasive interactions slowly turned into quiet conversations in the corner booth, which eventually snowballed into the bizarre, deeply protective love story they shared now. It's been, what, about a year and a half? Ren asked, his voice pulling him out of the memory. He tilted his head, closing the distance between them just a little more. The scent of her shampoo completely overpowered the smell of the food. 16 months, Maki corrected automatically. As soon as the words left her mouth, she bit her lower lip, looking intensely frustrated that she had the exact timeline memorized. She crossed her arms protectively over her chest, trying to rebuild her tough exterior. I ask again, you idiot. Why are you bringing up ancient history while... She gestured vaguely and aggressively toward the TV, where the cinematic rain was now completely drenching the actors. While that is happening, I don't know, Ren murmured, holding her gaze. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but he forced himself to stay perfectly still. Just realized that 16 months is a pretty long time. Maki's breath hitched. She stared back at him, her amber eyes searching his face. The annoyance in her expression slowly melted away, replaced by something much softer, much more vulnerable, and incredibly dangerous for Ren's current state of mind. The TV continued to play loudly in the background, but neither of them was paying attention to the broadcast anymore. The air between them suddenly felt infinitely heavier than it had a minute ago. The air between them suddenly felt infinitely heavier than it had a minute ago, thick with unspoken questions and a sudden, electric tension. Ren didn't pull back. Maki instinctively leaned back as he approached, her hands dropping behind her for support. But Ren kept moving, his gaze completely tethered to hers. Overwhelmed by the sudden, suffocating proximity, Maki's elbows gave out. She slumped backward, her spine hitting the soft floor cushions with a soft thud. Ren followed her down immediately. He planted his hands firmly on the floor on either side of her head, caging her in. Maki's breath caught in her throat, her chest rising and falling rapidly under the oversized black t-shirt. Her dark green hair fanned out in a messy, beautiful halo against the tatami mat. She stared up at him, her amber eyes impossibly wide, completely stripped of her usual fierce bravado. Is this it? Maki swallowed hard, the frantic thought echoing loudly in her head over the sound of the TV. Is today the day? Am I actually going to lose my first time right now? Her mind instantly spiraled into a uniquely Zenin brand of panic. She was a powerhouse. She threw cursed spirits through concrete walls for a living. Ren was a normal, fragile civilian. If she went too far, if she lost herself in the moment and gripped him too hard, I have to control my strength, she reminded herself frantically, her fingers curling tightly against the floorboards. I can't lose control. I can't hurt him. I have to be careful. Her frantic thoughts were abruptly cut off as Ren leaned down, entirely erasing the distance between them. His lips pressed against hers, soft and hesitant at first, feeling out the boundary. Maki let out a muffled, surprised gasp, and that was all the invitation he needed. Ren tilted his head, parting his lips as the kiss slowly deepened, his tongue gently sliding past her lips to meet hers. Maki's entire body went rigid for a second, her enhanced muscles tensing under the flood of new, overwhelming sensations. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind violently warring between giving in and her fear of accidentally crushing him. Sensing the rigid tension in her shoulders, Ren pulled back just a fraction of an inch. His lips brushed against hers as he exhaled, his voice a warm, soothing murmur against her mouth. Stop, he whispered gently, his dark eyes looking down into hers. Don't think so much. He knew exactly what she was doing. Maki looking up at his soft, reassuring expression. The ironclad grip she had on her own anxiety finally shattered. Screw it, she thought, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She was strong, but she wasn't a monster. She wouldn't hurt him. Maki let out a shaky sigh and finally gave in. The remaining tension bled out of her posture as she melted back against the floor cushions. She opened her mouth, kissing him back with a sudden, desperate heat that made Ren's head spin. The kiss deepened rapidly, the background noise of the dramatic movie completely fading away as the reality of the moment finally crashed over them both. Ren slowly shifted his weight, his hands leaving the floor beside her head. He traced his palms down the sides of her arms, his touch feather-light and burning, before sliding down to her waist. He gripped the soft fabric of his own oversized shirt where it bunched around her hips before his hands moved lower, finally settling bare against her smooth, powerfully toned thighs. A soft, breathless sound escaped the back of Maki's throat. She let her hands leave the floor, reaching up to tangle her fingers desperately into his dark hair. Yielding completely to the heavy, intoxicating gravity between them, she shifted her hips, slowly lifting her legs to wrap them firmly around his waist, pulling him so close there was no space between them. Ren broke the kiss, his lips trailing down the sharp line of her jawline before pressing against the sensitive skin of her neck. He felt Maki's breath hit sharply as he kissed the pulse point there before he gently bit down, letting his lips linger just long enough to leave a blossoming, bruised reddish-purple mark against her pale skin. A quiet, desperate gasp escaped her lips. Maki's fingers dug into his shoulders, her back arching slightly off the floor cushions. The intoxicating haze of the moment had completely taken over. Ren's hand slid up under the oversized black t-shirt, his fingertips brushing against the warm skin of her stomach, entirely ready to move onto the main thing. And then, a loud, obnoxious pop song blared through the apartment. Ring, ring, ring. Maki froze, her eyes flying open. Ren groaned, his forehead dropping against her collarbone. The buzzing vibration was coming from her heavy weapons case resting near the hallway. Ignore it, Ren muttered against her skin, pressing another kiss to her collarbone. Ring, ring, ring. Aye. Maki swallowed hard, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her lips swollen and her face flushed crimson. I can't. It's my high school emergency line. If I don't answer, they might send someone to my location. That was the ultimate mood killer. The absolute last thing Ren needed was Satoru Gojo teleporting into his living room right now. With a heavy sigh of defeat, Ren rolled off her. He stood up, running a hand through his messy hair, and walked over to the weapons case. He dug through the side pocket and pulled out her aggressively vibrating smartphone. He glanced at the bright screen, his eyebrows furrowed together in a mixture of profound annoyance and utter bewilderment. He walked back over to Maki, who was sitting up and aggressively tugging the oversized t-shirt back down her thighs, her face still bright red. Ren made a deeply weird face, turning the screen toward her. Maki, why is someone named Panda calling you? He asked, his voice deadpan. He knew exactly who it was, of course, but the sheer absurdity of being G-blocked by a giant, talking cursed corpse was almost too much to process. Maki's eyes locked onto the caller ID. The flush of embarrassment on her face instantly vanished, replaced by an aura of pure, murderous rage. Give me that, she snarled, snatching the phone from his hand. She stood up, her bare feet stomping across the living room floor. She slid the glass balcony door open, stepped out into the chilly night air, and slammed it shut behind her, though not quite hard enough to block out the sound of her voice. Ren sat back down on the sofa, burying his face in his hands as he listened to his girlfriend absolutely unleash hell. What? Maki roared into the receiver, pacing like a caged tiger on the small balcony. Do you have any idea what time it is? No, I don't care if Toj is stuck in a vending machine. Why are you calling me about it? Call Gojo. Call Ajichi. Call literally anyone else. Through the glass, Ren watched her pinch the bridge of her nose, her shoulders tense with fury. She swatted a hand through the air as if trying to physically hit whoever was on the other end of the line. I am busy. Yes, actually busy. No, I am not training, Maki yelled, her face flushing pink again, though this time purely out of anger. If you ever interrupt me on a Thursday night again, I am going to turn your stuffing into a rug. Do you hear me? A rug, Panda. Rin leaned back against the cushions, letting out a long, tragic sigh. He watched her through the glass. He let out another sigh and let his head fall back against the couch. He was frustrated, but mostly he just felt tired. Through the glass, Run watched her aggressively stab the end call button. She stood out there for another few seconds, taking deep, steadying breaths to wrangle her temper before finally turning around. She slid the balcony door open, stepped inside, and pulled it shut with a sharp clack that sealed away the noise of the city. The murderous aura was gone, replaced by a heavy, guilty exhaustion. She tossed the phone onto the kitchen counter like it was a live grenade and rubbed the back of her neck, avoiding his eyes. "Peyton, I'm really sorry," Maki muttered, her voice dropping back down to that soft, hesitant tone from earlier. She walked slowly over to the coffee table. "My classmates are literal toddlers. They apparently can't function without me supervising them for a single night." "It's fine," Ren said gently, keeping his posture relaxed on the couch. It sounded like an emergency, a weird, zoo-related emergency, but still. Maki let out a humorless half-laugh. Feeling exposed in the sudden awkwardness that had replaced their heavy tension, she reached down to the coffee table and picked up her wire-rimmed glasses. "I really am sorry," she repeated, looking at him with a genuinely apologetic pout. "I'll make it up to you." The silence in the living room stretched out, thick and heavy with the sudden, jarring shift in the atmosphere. The dramatic orchestral score from the TV movie had ended, replaced by the low murmur of late-night commercials, making the quiet even more pronounced. Run watched Maki fidget with her wire-rimmed glasses, sliding them back onto her face. The lenses caught the dim light, momentarily hiding her amber eyes. He let out a slow breath, deciding to break the tension before it completely derailed the rest of their night. A slow, teasing smirk spread across his face as he tilted his head. "Make it up to me, huh?" he repeated, his voice low and deliberate. "That's a pretty broad promise, Maki. Exactly how do you plan to do that?" Maki blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift from understanding boyfriend to playful instigator. The apologetic look melted away, replaced by a momentary flash of pure, unadulterated confusion. "I don't know," she said, her voice dropping into a surprisingly innocent tone that she almost never used. She rubbed the back of her neck again, looking genuinely flustered. "I mean, I guess I'll do whatever you want." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with a sudden, dangerous implication. Ren didn't miss a beat. In one fluid motion, he leaned forward, his hand shooting out to lightly grab her wrist. He didn't pull hard. The sheer surprise was enough to throw her off balance. With a quick, smooth tug, he pulled her forward. Maki let out a sharp squeak of surprise as she stumbled, her knees hitting the soft edge of the sofa before she pitched forward, landing squarely on top of his chest. Ren wrapped an arm securely around her waist, trapping her against him. He looked up into her wide, startled eyes, his smirk widening. "Anything?" he murmured, the word a soft, teasing challenge against her ear. The bright red flush that had finally started to fade from Maki's cheeks instantly roared back to life, painting her face a brilliant crimson. She braced her hands against his shoulders, trying to push herself up, but she didn't put any real strength behind it. I said whatever I want to agree to, you idiot," she sputtered, her voice rising an octave in a desperate attempt to regain control. She glared down at him, though it was entirely ineffective given the circumstances. "Not everything. Only the things I say yes to. Right? Ren chuckled, his chest vibrating against hers. Terms and conditions apply. Got it. Shut up, she muttered, though she finally stopped struggling, letting her weight settle against him. She rested her chin on her hands against his chest, still glaring at him, but the sharp edge of her annoyance had completely melted away. The faint blue light of the television flickered across the walls, casting soft shadows in the quiet apartment. Maki remained draped over Ren's chest, her rapid heartbeat slowly evening out against his ribs. For a long minute, neither of them said anything. Maki's fingers idly traced the seam of his t-shirt, her gaze fixed somewhere near his collarbone. The fierce, uncompromising sorcerer was completely gone, leaving only a girl trying to work up the nerve to say something terrifying. "Hey," she mumbled, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the hum of the fridge. Ren hummed, his hand gently stroking the soft strands of her dark green hair. She took a deep, steadying breath, though her fingers briefly clenched in the fabric of his shirt. "My schedule," she started, the words coming out slightly rushed. "My track coach. He gave me tomorrow off. The whole day." Ren paused his hand. He looked down, trying to catch her eye, but she steadfastly refused to look up. "The whole day?" "Yeah," Maki confirmed, her voice dropping into a register so incredibly shy it almost gave Ren whiplash. The crimson flush that had just started to fade immediately rushed back, painting her ears a bright, burning pink. "I'm totally free tomorrow, so we can, if you want to." She finally peeked up at him through her lashes, biting her lower lip. "Finish what we started." Ren couldn't help the slow, teasing smirk that spread across his face. He let his hand trail down her back, drawing lazy circles against the fabric of the oversized t-shirt. "Finish what we started?" he repeated softly, letting the words hang in the air. He pretended to mull it over, tilting his head. "I don't know, Maki. That's a pretty big commitment. Are you sure you can fit me in? What if the track coach suddenly needs you for emergency hurdle practice?" Maki groaned, squeezing her eyes shut as she aggressively buried her burning face into his shoulder. "I swear to God, Ran, if you ruin this for me right now," she threatened, though the effect was completely ruined by her muffled voice and the fact that she was actively hiding from him. "I'm just making sure," Ran chuckled, his chest vibrating beneath her. He wrapped both arms around her waist, finally pulling her fully against him. "Tomorrow, the whole day. It's a date." "Yeah," she mumbled, the lingering tension in her muscles finally bleeding away. "A date." The quiet of the apartment settled over them. Between her lack of proper sleep and the grueling, muscle-cramping physical exhaustion she had brought with her, it didn't take long for the adrenaline to completely crash. Within minutes, the frantic beating of her heart slowed against his chest, and her breathing leveled out into a soft, steady rhythm. Rin stayed awake just a little longer, watching the faint blue light of the television flicker across the walls before he eventually closed his eyes, letting the static hum of the system fade to the back of his mind. The morning sun completely transformed the apartment, washing away the heavy, suffocating tension of the previous night and replacing it with a bright, comfortable warmth. Ren stepped out of the bedroom, running a hand through his messy hair, only to stop dead in his tracks in the hallway. Maki was standing near the front door, already wide awake and fully dressed. But instead of borrowing one of his hoodies or magically producing a casual outfit, she was completely buttoned up in her dark, high-collared Jujutsu high uniform. The dark jacket, the pleated skirt, and the opaque tights. She looked ready to exorcise a grade 1 curse, not go to the arcade or a cafe. Over her shoulder, she had slung a sleek but heavy-looking carrying bag. Ren leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Let me get this straight. You finally get a whole day off from your tyrannical track coach. We're about to go on an actual, proper date, and you decided to wear your stuffy boarding school uniform." Maki's shoulders instantly stiffened. A faint pink dusted her cheeks as she looked down at her dark clothes, suddenly looking very self-conscious. She crossed her arms defensively, her amber eyes narrowing into a glare. "Shut up. It's all I had on me," she muttered, aggressively adjusting the strap of her bag. "I didn't exactly have time to go back to my dorm to pack a weekend bag, and I have to carry my expensive track batons with me. This uniform is durable. It makes sense. It makes you look like you're about to proctor an exam, Maki." Rin laughed, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her. He stopped right in front of her, gently flicking the high collar of her dark jacket. She scowled, swatting his hand away, but there was no real heat behind the gesture. "All right, change of plans," Rin announced smoothly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his apartment keys. Maki blinked, looking up at him with a flash of panic. "What? Are we not going out?" "Oh, we're definitely going out," Rin smirked, slipping past her to push the front door open. He stepped out into the hallway and gestured for her to follow. "But there is absolutely no way I'm letting you walk around Tokyo on our date looking like a strict hall monitor. First stop, we're getting you some actual, good clothes." Maki stepped out of the apartment, her blush deepening as she scoffed. "I don't need you to buy me clothes, idiot. My uniform is perfectly fine." "It's a tragedy, is what it is," Rin deadpanned, pulling the heavy door shut behind them and locking the deadbolt with a crisp click. He spun the keyring around his finger and looked at her, his dark eyes filled with that same warm, effortless confidence from the night before. "Besides, you promised me last night, whatever you want to agree to, right? And I want to see my girlfriend in something that doesn't look like it's made of tactical armor." At the reminder of her breathless, flustered promise from the night before, Maki's face turned a brilliant, violent shade of red. She practically choked on her own breath, her grip tightening on the strap of her weapons bag until her knuckles turned white. You, just shut up and walk," she stammered aggressively, stomping down the hallway toward the stairs to hide her burning face. Rin chuckled softly to himself, shoving his hands into his pockets as he followed her down the hall. The date had officially begun. The fluorescent lights of the bustling Shibuya Mall were a stark contrast to the dim, quiet halls of Jujutsu High, and Maki looked entirely out of her element. She stepped out from behind the heavy curtain of the dressing room, her hands awkwardly smoothing down the front of her new outfit. The transformation was absolute. Gone was the rigid, tactical school uniform. Instead, she was wearing a soft, fitted beige ribbed turtleneck sweater tucked into a high-waisted, olive green skirt that stopped just above her knees. It was a far cry from her usual combat gear, perfectly highlighting her athletic build while looking completely, beautifully normal. She had even put her wire-rimmed glasses back on, framing her amber eyes and giving her an effortlessly cool, sophisticated look. "Well?" Maki asked, her voice dropping a defensive octave as she nervously shifted her weight. She pulled slightly at the hem of the skirt. "Is this looking good? Or do I look stupid? Because I feel like I'm completely exposed in this." Ren stood outside the dressing room, leaning against a display rack. He actually forgot how to breathe for a second. "You don't look stupid," Ren finally managed, his voice slightly softer than usual. He grabbed one last dress from the rack next to him, a sleek black number, and held it out to her with a returning smirk. "Here, try this one just for fun. But we're absolutely getting the sweater and skirt. That's the winner." 20 minutes later, they were walking out of the boutique. Ron was casually carrying 3 glossy shopping bags filled with the extra dresses and casual tops he had absolutely insisted on buying for her, completely ignoring her protests about him spending his money. As they merged into the crowded mall concourse, Ron found his gaze constantly drifting to his right. Maki was walking a half step ahead of him, her dark green ponytail swaying slightly with her confident strides. Without the heavy, suffocating weight of her jujitsu life dragging her shoulders down, She looked genuinely stunning. Maki caught him staring from her peripheral vision. A faint pink dusted her cheeks, and she defensively crossed her arms over her chest, the heavy cursed tool bag still slung securely over her shoulder. "Stop staring," she muttered, though there was no real venom in it. She looked down at the soft fabric of the beige turtleneck. "It's weird. It's my first time actually wearing these kinds of clothes. I'm used to things that are tear-resistant and dark enough to hide dirt." She caught herself right before saying blood. "You look beautiful, Maki," Ren said effortlessly, completely ignoring her flustered scowl. He shifted the shopping bags to his left hand and closed the small distance between them. Without making a big deal out of it, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers before he gently but firmly took her hand. Maki's breath hitched. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, her combat instincts practically hardwired to react to sudden touches. But as soon as she felt the warm, familiar grip of his hand, she immediately relaxed, her fingers slowly intertwining with his. "So," Ren said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze to distract her from her nerves. He looked around the multi-level mall. "Now that you're officially dressed for a date, where to? You want to grab some coffee? Or tea? I know a great spot right down the street near Shibuya Crossing." Maki's heart skipped a beat, but this time, it had absolutely nothing to do with romance. Shibuya Crossing? Main Tokyo? Maki's mind instantly began running tactical calculations at lightning speed. No way in hell. If we stay in central Tokyo, the chances of running into someone from the school are dangerously high. Fushiguro patrols around here. Satoru is always roaming around looking for trendy desserts. And if Panda catches me skipping training to hold hands in a mall, I'll never hear the end of it. If her classmates figured out she was dating someone, they would either tease her mercilessly or, worse, drag Ren into their dangerous, cursed world. She couldn't risk it. "No," Maki blurted out, maybe a little too quickly. She squeezed his hand, pulling him gently but urgently toward the exit escalators. "Not Shibuya. Let's go. Somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. I know a little tea shop in a totally boring, out-of-the-way district." The train ride out to the sleepy, out-of-the-way district was the deep breath Maki desperately needed. Away from the dense, suffocating cursed energy of central Shibuya, the tight coil of tension in her chest finally unspooled. They found the quiet little tea shop she had promised. Ren made a point of ordering the most ridiculously sweet pastries on the menu, teasing her relentlessly every time a speck of powdered sugar threatened to ruin her new beige turtleneck. They spent hours just talking, wandering through a local botanical garden, and browsing dusty retro bookstores where Ren pretended to understand highbrow literature just to make her laugh. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement, Maki walked closely beside him, their hands comfortably intertwined. She caught herself staring at the sidewalk, genuinely bewildered. Since when did my luck get this good? Usually, the jujutsu world had a terrible habit of ruining her rare moments of peace. She had spent the first half of the day completely braced for Satoru Gojo to magically pop out of a trash can with a camera or for a rogue, low-grade cursed spirit to force her to draw a weapon in front of Rin. But nothing happened. The universe had miraculously given her a free pass. It was just an uninterrupted, perfect bubble of normalcy. The streetlights flickered on, buzzing with a faint electric hum as they finally navigated back to Ren's neighborhood. They were less than a block away from his apartment building when Ren suddenly stopped in front of a brightly lit convenience store. "Hold that thought," Ren said, gently untangling his fingers from hers. He offered her an easy smile and pointed his thumb at the automatic sliding doors. "I need to grab something real quick. Wait right here." Maki blinked, adjusting the strap of her heavy weapons bag on her shoulder. "Right now? We're literally 2 minutes from your place. What do you even need?" "Just last-minute essentials," Rin said smoothly, already taking a step backward toward the store. "I'll be out in 60 seconds. Promise." Before she could interrogate him further, the glass doors slid open, and he disappeared down one of the aisles. Maki leaned against the brick wall outside, crossing her arms. She frowned, trying to peer through the glass windows covered in colorful ads. Essentials? He had just said yesterday that he bought fresh groceries. Inside the store, Ren bypassed the snacks entirely. His heart was hammering a sudden, frantic rhythm against his ribs as he walked straight to the pharmacy aisle. He stared at the colorful little boxes on the bottom shelf for exactly 2 seconds before grabbing a sleek, dark box, paying in exact change, and shoving it deep into his jacket pocket. The system's glowing interface might have given him a cheat code for power, but he wasn't about to leave the real-world logistics to magic. When the glass doors slid open again, Ren emerged looking completely casual, holding a single, decoy bottle of green tea. Maki narrowed her eyes at him. "You made me stand out in the cold for a bottle of tea? Hydration is important, Maki," Ren deadpanned, unscrewing the cap and taking a sip. He smoothly stepped back to her side, offering his free hand. "Come on, let's go home." Back to the apartment, the walk up the stairs to his floor. The playful banter from the mall had faded into a comfortable yet electric silence. Ren unlocked the door, the deadbolt clicking loudly in the quiet hallway. He pushed the door open, letting Maki step inside first. The apartment was exactly as they had left it, warm, quiet, and smelling faintly of the dinner they had cooked the night before. Maki didn't even bother walking all the way to the bedroom. She kicked off her shoes in the entryway, let her heavy weapons case slide off her shoulder with a solid thud against the floorboards, and walked straight over to the low green sofa. She practically collapsed onto the cushions, letting out a long, dramatic sigh as the sheer physical exhaustion of walking around all day finally caught up with her. She draped her arms over the back of the couch, letting her head fall back to look up at the ceiling. Ren locked the door and walked over, tossing his keys onto the kitchen island. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms as he looked down at her. Maki rolled her head to the side to meet his gaze. The wire-rimmed glasses were slightly askew on her nose. Her dark green hair was a messy halo against the cushions, and she looked absolutely beautiful. A soft, completely unguarded smile broke across her face, the kind of smile she only ever saved for him. "Today," Maki murmured, her voice quiet and filled with a deep, genuine warmth. "Was really great, idiot." Maki pushed herself up from the low green sofa with a soft groan, the exhaustion in her muscles temporarily protesting the movement. "I'm going to wash my face," she mumbled, padding barefoot across the living room and slipping into the small bathroom down the hall. Flicking on the harsh overhead light, she leaned over the sink and let out a long breath. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the vanity. Her amber eyes looked tired but relaxed, completely stripped of their usual fierce bravado. Slowly, her fingers drifted up to the high collar of the beige ribbed turtleneck Ren had bought her. She pulled the soft fabric down just a fraction. There it was, right on the sensitive skin of her neck, sitting directly over her pulse point. A blossoming, bruised reddish-purple mark. The vivid love bite stood out starkly against her pale skin, a visceral reminder of exactly how close they had gotten the night before Panda's obnoxious phone call had ruined the moment. A fresh wave of heat rushed up her neck and instantly painted her ears a bright, burning pink. She stared at the mark for a long moment. Her heart kicked up a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She had spent the entire day building up to this, mentally preparing herself to finally drop her guard completely. She was a powerhouse who threw cursed spirits through concrete walls for a living, but right now, she was just a girl standing in a bathroom trying to find her courage. "I promised him," she reminded herself. Maki let the collar of her sweater snap back into place, hiding the mark. She took one last, deep, steadying breath to wrangle her nerves, and stepped back out into the hallway. Ren was still in the kitchen. He had taken his jacket off and was leaning casually against the counter. His back turned to her as he absent-mindedly organized the small pile of receipts, the decoy bottle of tea, and the keys they had dumped there. Maki didn't hesitate this time. She crossed the short distance across the living room floor, her footsteps entirely silent. Ren didn't even hear her coming until her arms were suddenly wrapping tightly around his waist from behind. He froze, letting out a sharp breath of surprise as Maki pressed herself, chest against his back. The soft, fitted fabric of her new turtleneck did nothing to hide the firm press of her chest against his shoulder blades. She buried her face into the space between his shoulder and his neck, her dark green hair tickling his skin. Ren's hands dropped the keys onto the counter. He slowly reached up, resting his hands over hers where they were locked over his stomach. He could feel the rapid, unmistakable pounding of her heart against his back. "Maki," he murmured, his voice dropping low. For a second, she didn't say anything, just holding him tighter, grounding herself in his warmth. Then, she turned her head slightly, her lips brushing against his shoulder as she spoke. Her voice was muffled, laced with her trademark bluntness but entirely betraying how impossibly shy she felt. "I saw what you bought at the convenience store. Idiot," she muttered, her fingers curling tightly into his shirt to anchor herself. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to push past the nerves. "If you make me actually say it out loud, I'm gonna punch you. So just shut up and take me to your room." A low, breathy chuckle vibrated in Ren's chest, the sound rumbling directly against Maki's cheek. Slowly, his hands moved from where they rested over hers. He gently unlaced her fingers, turning around within the tight circle of her arms so they were finally face to face. The second he looked at her, all of Maki's bold, demanding energy evaporated. A brilliant, burning heat rushed to her cheeks, painting her face crimson. She immediately averted her gaze, stubbornly glaring at a spot on the hardwood floor just past his shoulder, completely unable to meet his dark eyes. She bit her lower lip, her chest rising and falling rapidly under the soft beige turtleneck. Ren didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He stepped directly into her space, his hands dropping to settle firmly on her waist. Before her combat-wired brain could even process the shift in his center of gravity, Ren walked her backward. It only took 2 steps before her lower back hit the edge of the kitchen counter with a soft bump. Maki let out a startled squeak, her wide amber eyes finally snapping up to meet his. But Ron didn't give her a single second to overthink it. He leaned down and captured her lips in a deep, decisive kiss that instantly silenced her. Maki gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively flying up to grab his shoulders to steady herself. Taking advantage of her parted lips, Ren seamlessly deepened the kiss. His tongue slid past her lips, meeting hers in a heated, desperate rhythm that made her head spin. With his hands still gripping her waist, Ren smoothly lifted her up, sitting her directly onto the cool surface of the kitchen counter. The new angle allowed him to step perfectly between her knees, pressing his chest firmly against hers, leaving absolutely zero space between them. Maki's initial shock melted away into pure, intoxicating heat. She let out a soft, breathless moan that vibrated between them, her hands sliding from his shoulders up into his messy hair, her fingers curling tightly into the strands. She kissed him back fiercely, their tongues sinking in a slow, heavy dance that completely erased the rest of the world. The cool marble of the counter against her legs was a sharp contrast to the burning heat radiating from Ren's hands where they gripped her hips, anchoring her exactly where she had asked to be. Maki finally broke the kiss, pulling back just a fraction of an inch to drag in a desperate, shaky breath. A thin, glistening string of saliva connected their lips for a split second before parting, a testament to the sheer heat of the moment. Her chest heaved against his, her amber eyes hazy, darkened, and completely stripped of their usual sharp edge. Suddenly, a very specific, paranoid thought seemed to pierce through the intoxicating fog in her brain. Last night's disaster was still entirely too fresh in her mind. Reluctantly untangling one hand from his messy hair, Maki reached into the pocket of her olive green skirt. She pulled out her smartphone, didn't even bother looking at the screen, and blindly pitched it over Ren's shoulder. It sailed through the air and landed squarely on the low green sofa with a muffled, satisfying thud. She breathed, her voice raspy and absolute. Not tonight. Before Ren could even smile at the gesture, she brought her hand right back to the nape of his neck. Shifting her weight on the cool marble, Maki pulled her knees forward and securely locked her legs around his waist, drawing him as close as physically possible. Ren let out a low, appreciative hum, his hands naturally sliding down to grip the backs of her thighs to support her. He leaned in, pressing a hot, lingering kiss to the sharp line of her jaw. "Good idea," he murmured, his breath ghosting over her skin. He tightened his grip, effortlessly lifting her entirely off the counter. "But if we're doing this, we're definitely not doing it in the kitchen." Maki let out a quiet gasp as her center of gravity shifted, instinctively tightening her hold around his neck as he carried her toward the short hallway. She buried her burning face into the crook of his shoulder, completely overwhelmed by the sudden, sweeping momentum of it all. "Just shut up and walk, idiot," she mumbled into his collarbone, though the stubborn words were betrayed by the way she practically melted into his hold. The short walk down the hallway felt like it took both an eternity and a fraction of a second. Rin carried her effortlessly into his bedroom, the bright overhead light from the ceiling illuminating the messy, familiar space. He leaned forward, gently lowering Maki onto the edge of the mattress. As her back hit the soft covers, she let out a quiet breath, slowly unhooking her legs from around his waist and letting them rest against the edge of the bed. Rin followed her down, caging her in with his arms as he settled his weight over her. His dark eyes held hers for a long moment before his hands slid from the mattress to her waist. His fingers caught the thick hem of her soft beige ribbed turtleneck sweater, preparing to pull it up. Instantly, Maki's hands snapped down, her fingers wrapping tightly around his wrists. Rin paused, looking down at her in surprise. The fierce, intoxicating heat in her amber eyes had suddenly been replaced by a wave of intense, crippling shyness. The brilliant crimson flush that had painted her face earlier returned with a vengeance. She averted her gaze, stubbornly refusing to look at him as she bit her lower lip. "Wait," Maki muttered, her voice incredibly small, entirely betraying her tough exterior. She nervously pulled at the collar of the sweater. "Turn the lights off first, please." Run couldn't help the slow, teasing smirk that spread across his face. He kept his hands resting lightly under the hem of her sweater, his thumbs gently brushing the warm skin of her stomach. "Let me get this straight," Rin murmured, leaning in close so his breath ghosted over her burning cheek. "You forcefully grab me, demand I bring you to the bedroom, and blindly chuck your phone across the living room like an action hero? But a light bulb is where you draw the line? I said shut up and do it, idiot," she groaned, squeezing her eyes shut and aggressively pushing at his chest, though her hands were trembling slightly. "It's embarrassing." A low, breathy chuckle vibrated in Ren's chest. All right, your wish is my command." He shifted his weight, reaching over to the wall switch and flicking it down. The bright overhead light vanished, plunging the bedroom into darkness, save for the soft, silver moonlight spilling in through the window blinds. The shadows immediately seemed to ease the frantic tension in Maki's shoulders. She let out a long, shaky exhale, her grip on his wrists loosening. "Better," Rin whispered, his voice dropping into a smooth, soothing register. Before she could answer, Ren leaned down, bypassing her lips entirely. He pressed a warm, lingering kiss to the side of her jaw, trailing slowly down to the sensitive skin of her neck. He found the exact spot where the bruised reddish-purple love bite sat directly over her pulse point, and pressed his lips firmly against it. Maki let out a sharp, quiet gasp, her back arching slightly off the mattress. Her hands left his wrists, sliding up to tangle desperately into his messy hair. The sudden, overwhelming rush of sensation completely hijacked her senses, replacing her nerves with a heavy, building heat. Taking advantage of her distraction, Ren's hands moved back to the hem of her sweater. "Glasses first," he murmured against her skin. Maki blindly reached up with one hand, pulling her wire-rimmed glasses off her face and tossing them carelessly onto the nightstand. With smooth, agonizingly slow movements, Ren gripped the beige fabric and pulled the turtleneck up. Maki raised her arms, letting him slip the soft sweater completely over her head and toss it onto the floor. The moonlight cast long shadows across the bed, revealing what she had been wearing underneath. Beneath the thick winter sweater, she wore a snug, thin black camisole that clung perfectly to her athletic, powerfully toned torso. Through the delicate, dark fabric of the undershirt, the thick, practical straps of a black sports bra were clearly visible, offering a stark, deeply attractive contrast to the soft, olive green skirt she still wore. Ren let his gaze drag over her, his eyes darkening. He traced his fingertips lightly down the side of the camisole, feeling the frantic, heavy beating of her heart beneath the fabric. "You're beautiful," he whispered honestly, leaning down to capture her lips once more. Maki felt the sudden, cool kiss of the night air against her bare skin as the sweater hit the floor. Without the thick fabric to hide behind, she felt dangerously exposed in the dim, silver moonlight. Her hands, which had been tangled in Ren's hair, dropped to her sides, her fingers curling into the bedsheets as if trying to anchor herself against the overwhelming rush of vulnerability. She watched him through the shadows, her amber eyes wide and hazy as he lingered, his gaze tracing the lines of her black camisole. The intense, burning shyness she had been fighting all night flared up again, making her chest heave as she struggled to maintain her usual fierce composure. "What are you looking at?" Maki muttered, her voice raspy and lacking any real bite. She shifted her weight on the mattress, her face flushing a deep, brilliant crimson that even the shadows couldn't hide. "And why the hell am I the only one losing my clothes here? Shouldn't you? It's not fair if you stay like that." Ren let out a low, appreciative hum, his eyes reflecting the soft light from the window. "Fair point," he murmured, his teasing smirk softening into something more intense. He sat back on his heels just enough to reach the hem of his own shirt, pulling it over his head in one fluid motion and tossing it aside. As he leaned back over her, the heat from his bare chest radiating against hers, Ren's hands moved to the thin straps of her camisole. Maki took a sharp, shaky breath, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs that she was sure he could feel. She looked at his face, the patient, effortless confidence in his dark eyes, and the last of her hesitation finally shattered. She knew there was no going back now, and for the first time she didn't want there to be. Gathering her courage, Maki let out a soft, determined exhale and lifted her arms slightly, her fingers brushing against his as she helped him slide the thin black fabric up and over her head. In the soft glow of the moon, Ren let his gaze linger on the physical gift of her heavenly restriction. Her skin was pale and flawless, save for the occasional faint reminder of her brutal training sessions. The black sports bra she wore beneath the camisole held her breasts firmly, highlighting her powerfully toned, athletic frame. Below that, her stomach was smooth and flat, her muscles defining a curved, narrow waist that Ren's hands fit perfectly as he slid them back to her sides. She looked like a masterpiece of strength and grace, a literal weapon honed by years of struggle, yet she was currently soft and yielding beneath him. Maki caught him staring and immediately squeezed her eyes shut, her face burning hotter than before. "Run!" she hissed, her voice small and embarrassed as she tried to pull him back down toward her to hide herself. "Stop it. You're making it weird." "I'm not," Ren whispered, his voice thick with sincerity as he leaned in to kiss the curve of her shoulder. "I'm just realizing how lucky I am." Ren didn't give her another second to hide away in her own head. Before Maki could pull him down to bury her burning face in his shoulder, he leaned in and captured her lips again. This time, there was no hesitation, no slow buildup. The kiss was deep, demanding, and utterly relentless. He parted her lips with ease, his tongue sweeping inside to explore her mouth in a heavy, intoxicating rhythm that immediately short-circuited whatever remaining protests she had lined up. Maki let out a startled, breathy sound, her hands automatically flying up to grip his shoulders. She was entirely consumed by the overwhelming heat of the kiss, her mind struggling to keep up with the sheer intensity of it. That was precisely what Ren had been counting on. His hands moved to take advantage of her distraction. His right hand trailed slowly down from her waist, his fingertips tracing a burning path over the bare, smooth skin of her stomach. She shivered under his touch, her breath hitching against his mouth. But before she could track what he was doing, his fingers found the waistband of her olive-green skirt. With agonizing slowness, he slid his hand beneath the fabric, slipping past the soft, dark lace of the panties she wore underneath. At the exact same time, his left hand moved upward. He traced the line of her ribs before his fingers boldly hooked under the thick, practical elastic band of her black sports bra. Pushing the tight fabric up, he fully cupped her bare breast. He let out a low, appreciative hum against her lips, his hand firmly squeezing the soft, heavy flesh while his thumb brushed deliberately over her sensitive peak. The double assault on her senses was absolute. Maki's eyes squeezed shut, a brilliant, violent crimson flush instantly overtaking her entire face and chest. A sharp, undeniable moan tore from her throat, muffled completely by his mouth as she melted helplessly into the mattress. Her powerful, combat-trained body arched up into his touch, her fingers digging almost painfully into his bare shoulders as the intoxicating sensory overload wiped away the very last of her carefully maintained restraint. Ren finally broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to let them both drag in a desperate, ragged breath. Before Maki's combat-wired instincts could urge her to move or pull him back down, Ren shifted his weight. With a smooth, deliberate motion, he caught both of her wrists, peeling her fingers away from his shoulders, and pinned her hands firmly against the mattress above her head. Maki blinked up at him, her amber eyes wide and hazy, her chest heaving under his gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ren immediately shook his head, a dark, intense look crossing his features that completely commanded the room. "Stay silent," he murmured, his voice dropping into a low, heavy register. "Don't interrupt." Maki's jaw clicked shut, her heart hammered wildly against her ribs as she stared up at him, entirely unsure of what he was going to do next, her body still trembling from the heat of his touch. Ren kept his grip on her wrists firm but gentle, leaning down slightly so his face was just inches from hers. The intense, commanding aura he had just built up suddenly fractured just a tiny fraction as a faint, almost sheepish smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. I did some reading online," Ren muttered, his voice dropping into a raspy whisper that sounded entirely too clinical for the current situation. "About this, since it's your first time, jumping straight into the main thing usually isn't ideal. The article said proper stimulation beforehand, specifically oral, makes everything significantly easier and a lot better for the girl. It's supposed to help you relax." Maki completely froze. The heavy, intoxicating haze of lust that had been consuming her brain practically screeched to a halt. Did he seriously just quote internet research to me right now? A vein practically throbbed in her forehead. The sheer, overwhelming urge to free her hands and punch him square in his preternaturally handsome face flared up hot and fast. Leave it to Ren to interrupt the most vulnerable, nerve-wracking moment of her life by turning it into a textbook study session. She glared up at him, her face burning an entirely new, violent shade of crimson. She tensed her arms, fully aware that she was entirely capable of throwing him off the bed and through the bedroom wall with a fraction of her strength. But then she saw the way he was looking at her, the genuine, absolute care beneath his teasing smirk, the fact that he had actually researched how to make sure she wouldn't be in pain. The anger melted as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by a deep, terrifying swarm of butterflies in her stomach that made her head spin all over again. Maki forced herself to control her strength. She swallowed hard, the muscles in her throat working nervously as she forced her arms to relax back against the pillows. She kept her mouth firmly shut, strictly adhering to his rule, but her narrowed eyes promised absolute retribution later. "Good," Ren praised softly, his smirk returning in full force as he felt the tension leave her wrists. He leaned down, pressing a quick, hot kiss to her collarbone. "Now just lay there. Don't move." She heard the distinct, sharp sound of another foil wrapper being torn open. "You promised me the whole day off, remember?" Ren whispered, leaning down to press a hot, lingering kiss to the curve of her spine. He settled his weight between her legs, resting his hands firmly on her hips. "Get ready for round 2. Maki let out a muffled groan into the pillow, though the way her hips instinctively arched backward to meet him entirely betrayed her eagerness. The rest of the night completely blurred into a haze of tangled sheets, desperate moans, and escalating heat. They didn't stop at round 2, or round 3. By the end of round 4, the absolute physical reality of their dynamic had finally caught up to them. Because of her heavenly restriction, Maki possessed an effectively bottomless well of stamina. Physically, she could have easily gone 10 rounds without breaking a sweat. The 4th round had completely drained Ren's reserves, as he was just a normal guy trying to keep pace with a superhuman. He collapsed onto his back, his chest heaving, his muscles aching with a deep, profound exhaustion, but a fiercely triumphant grin was plastered across his face. Maki might have had the stamina to keep going physically, but emotionally and sensorily, he was completely overwhelmed and deeply, perfectly satisfied. Her first time had been everything she hadn't known she needed. She let out a soft, breathy laugh, her amber eyes soft with a rare, unguarded affection. Crawling over the mattress, she collapsed heavily onto Ren's chest, resting her chin against his collarbone. She reached down, blindly grabbing the heavy duvet from the end of the bed and pulling it up over their bare, sweat-slicked bodies to ward off the chill of the early morning. Ren wrapped his arms securely around her waist, burying his face in her dark green hair as her steady heartbeat synced with his own. Safe, exhausted, and perfectly content, they both drifted off into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. Sunlight hit Ren's face, forcing him to squint at the alarm clock.
7:42 a.m.
He tried to roll over, but his lower back immediately protested. He groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. Keeping up with Maki had consequences. The mattress beside him was empty. The sheets were cool. He pushed himself up. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint sound of a spatula scraping a pan in the kitchen. He looked around the bedroom. The wrapper from last night was gone from the trash can. His clothes were folded into a neat stack on his desk. Maki's new skirt and sweater were draped carefully over the back of the chair. She had cleaned up while he was completely passed out. The door opened. Maki walked in carrying a tray with 2 bowls of rice, soup, and rolled omelets. She was already in her Jujutsu high uniform. The dark collar was zipped all the way up, completely hiding her neck. She stopped at the foot of the bed. Ren was sitting up, The blanket pooled around his waist, hair a mess. Maki looked at him, then quickly looked away. A bright red flush crept up her neck and over her ears. She set the tray down hard on the nightstand. The bowls rattled against the wood. "Get dressed," she said, her voice tight. She grabbed the stack of his clothes from the desk and threw them at him. The shirt hit him in the chest. "Eat before it gets cold. I have a train to catch." Rin caught the shirt. He watched her as she stood with her back to him, arms crossed. Anyone else would be laid out in bed all day after last night. But she was up, dressed, and making breakfast. Then she shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, but Rin noticed it. Her stance was just a little stiff. She favored her left leg a fraction of an inch when she turned back around. She was tough, but last night had still taken a toll. Rin smiled to himself. "Yeah, I'm up," he said, pulling the shirt over his head. They ate at the small table in the living room. Maki chewed her food in silence, staring intently at the wall. The redness hadn't completely left her ears. Every time Rin shifted in his seat on the floor cushions, her shoulders tensed. Once they finished, he grabbed his jacket and they walked to the station. Maki walked a little ahead of him, her heavy weapon case slung over her shoulder. She was back in work mode. The platform was busy. A robotic voice announced her train just as it pulled in, the brakes hissing loudly. The doors slid open. Maki stopped before the yellow line and adjusted her glasses. She wouldn't look him in the eye. "I'm going," she said gruffly. "I have weapon maintenance, and Panda probably broke something while I was out. I'll text you." She turned toward the open doors, but she didn't step forward immediately. She shifted her grip on her bag, hesitating just for a second. Rin reached out and grabbed her wrist. Maki let out a short gasp as he pulled her back. He stepped behind a wide concrete pillar, pulling her with him, out of sight of the boarding crowd. Before she could complain, he pushed her lightly against the concrete and kissed her. Maki went completely stiff. Her hand came up and grabbed his jacket, gripping the fabric tight. For a second, she closed her eyes and kissed him back. Then she pushed him away, her hands flat on his chest. Her face was bright red again. "What are you doing?" she hissed, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She darted a look around the pillar to see if anyone was watching. "We're in public. Are you crazy?" She glared at him, but her breathing was heavy and her hands were nervously fidgeting with her bag strap. Ren leaned against the pillar, hands in his pockets. He smiled. "Just seeing you off. Have a good trip. Don't miss me too much." "Die," she muttered. The departure chime rang over the speakers. Maki spun around and practically ran for the train, slipping through the doors right before they closed. Ren watched through the window. She stomped down the aisle, dropped into a seat, and covered her red face with both hands. She didn't look back out the window as the train pulled away. Walking the short distance back to the apartment, the crisp morning air did little to shake the exhaustion. Legs heavy on the stairs, a dull ache settled into Ren's lower back with every step. Inside, the deadbolt clicked shut, sealing in the quiet. Keys clattered onto the kitchen counter, followed by a jacket tossed carelessly onto the sofa. Pausing in the middle of the living room, his gaze drifted to the floor where dinner with Maki had taken place just yesterday. Letting out a long breath, Run spoke to the empty room. "System." Nothing happened for a second. Then, a faint static hum vibrated at the base of his skull as the natural sunlight coming through the window dimmed just a fraction. Right in the center of his vision, a sharp, translucent blue panel materialized out of thin air. Instead of the usual status screen, a backlog of unread notifications immediately began scrolling. Condition fulfilled. Entity. Maki Zenin. Intimacy threshold. Maximum. Initiating extraction and assimilation. Assimilation complete. Reward acquired. Heavenly restriction. Physical gift. Incomplete. So it actually worked, Ren muttered, staring at the glowing text. Before the thought could even finish, a sharp, sudden heat flared in his chest. It lacked pain but hit with enough intensity to send him stumbling forward, catching heavily on the edge of the kitchen island. Heat rushed outward from his heart, flooding down his legs and straight to his fingertips. Gripping the edge of the counter, he squeezed his eyes shut as his body forcefully adjusted. Muscles tightened violently for 3 agonizing seconds, a heartbeat hammering against ribs. And then everything just released, eyes opening to the blue screen minimizing into the corners of his vision. Ren stood up straight and blinked. The deep, heavy exhaustion dragging him down all morning was completely gone. Even the lingering ache in his lower back had vanished. Breathing slow and effortless, a sensation of incredible lightness took over, as if gravity had just loosened its grip. Looking down, his hands appeared exactly the same, but the feedback from the nerves was entirely different. Turning back to the kitchen island, he placed his right hand flat over the edge of the thick marble. No wind-up, no braced feet, just a simple press of thumb and fingers against the stone, followed by a squeeze. Crack. A solid, jagged chunk of marble broke off and clattered onto the hardwood floor, leaving a rough white bite mark on the counter's edge. Ren yanked his hand back, staring from the broken stone to his fingers. That hadn't even been a hard squeeze. Felt like snapping a stale cookie. A slow, disbelieving laugh slipped out. Rubbing the back of his neck, he stared at the damage. He definitely wasn't a fragile civilian anymore. The broken chunk of marble felt dense and jagged as he bent down to pick it up. Running a thumb over the freshly snapped edge, a quiet exhale escaped his lips, tossing the heavy stone into the trash can. "Status," he said aloud. The translucent blue interface snapped instantly back to the center of his vision. Digital sparks cascaded down the screen, organizing themselves into the familiar, game-like list. But this time, the data had changed. User status. Name, Ren age, 17. Cursed energy level, civilian. Cursed technique, none. Heavenly restriction. Physical gift, incomplete. Unique trait, preternaturally handsome. Scanning the glowing text, a profound sense of relief washed over him. The civilian label under cursed energy remained exactly the same. Because Maki's restriction was still tied to her twin sister, her cursed energy wasn't completely eradicated to 0 like Toji Fushiguro's. That meant the system's replication followed the exact same rules. He wouldn't suddenly become an invisible, untrackable anomaly to other sorcerers, which was perfect for staying under the radar. Flexing his fingers, the raw, buzzing power thrumming just under the skin was undeniable. It wasn't full-blown invincibility. A special-grade curse would still tear him apart if he wasn't careful, and he still didn't have a weapon to actually exorcise anything. But surviving the meat grinder of the jujutsu world just became a very real possibility. Ren stared at the blue panel, entirely prepared to dismiss it, but the interface suddenly flickered. The crisp, translucent blue deepened into a stark, urgent gold. A new series of notifications rapidly cascaded down the center of his vision, accompanied by a sharp, repeating chime in the back of his mind. Hidden achievement unlocked. The sorcerer's right. Condition met first time was with an active jujutsu sorcerer, not an ordinary civilian woman.
Calculating bonus yield.
Extra rewards secured. 1. Feature unlock. Inventory. 2. Cognitive download. 15 years Zenin tactical weaponry and CQC mastery. 3. Item acquired. Grade 2 cursed tool. Wraith's Fong. Wait. Cognitive down. The world tilted. It wasn't a physical burn this time. It was a sheer, violently compressed data dump straight into his frontal lobe. Ren slammed his hands onto the edge of the kitchen counter. squeezing his eyes shut as 15 years of phantom memories violently overwrote his civilian reflexes. He felt the phantom weight of a spear shaft in his hands. He felt the jarring impact of blocking a downward strike, the precise footwork required to sweep an opponent's legs, and the exact muscle tension needed to snap a wrist or parry a blade. When he finally opened his eyes, his chest was heaving, a light sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. He pushed off the counter. The way he stood was fundamentally different. His balance was perfectly centered, his feet instinctively resting in a loose, flawless defensive stance without him even having to think about it. He wasn't just strong anymore. He was lethal. Inventory, Ren rasped, testing the new feature. The system responded instantly. A grid of empty, translucent gray squares materialized in the air just below his status screen. Only the very first slot was occupied, displaying a slowly rotating 3D icon of a sleek, dark blade. With a thought, he selected it. Space warped just an inch from his right hand. Run reached out, his fingers closing around a solid, leather-wrapped hilt. As he pulled it free, the weapon fully materialized into reality. It was a tactical tanto, about 14 inches long in total, with a matte black single-edged blade that seemed to entirely absorb the morning light. It was perfectly balanced, the weight distributing flawlessly into his grip as if it had been custom forged for his hand. But the moment his bare skin made contact with the hilt, the world around him shifted. The air in the apartment, which had looked perfectly clear a second ago, was suddenly overlaid with faint, lingering streaks of dark, static-like energy. Looking toward the entryway, he could see the residual, miasmic trails left behind by Maki's heavy cursed tools, where her weapons bag had rested on the floor the night before. Item: Wraith's Fong Grade 2. Trait: Ocular Resonance. The wielder is granted the temporary ability to perceive cursed energy and cursed spirits as long as physical contact with the weapon's hilt is maintained. Run spun the tanto effortlessly in his hand. A fluid, dangerously complex twirl that he absolutely hadn't known how to do 3 minutes ago. He caught it cleanly in a reverse grip, the dark blade resting perfectly parallel to his forearm. He was just starting to appreciate the lethal, effortless balance of the weapon when his phone buzzed violently against the kitchen counter, entirely ruining the moment. BZZZ. BZZZ. Ren blinked, the intense, combat-ready focus evaporating as he glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed an unsaved number. He flipped the knife, smoothly catching it by the scabbard, and picked up the phone with his free hand. Hello. Hey, hotshot. A brisk, distinctly female voice crackled through the speaker. Just making sure you didn't forget. The first shift starts at 10 sharp. Don't be late. I've already got 3 girls circling the store waiting for us to open, and I need my new star employee on the floor.
Ren mentally flatlinet.
Right, the job. Between surviving Maki's superhuman stamina, unlocking a heavenly restriction, and inheriting 15 years of lethal combat instincts, he had completely forgotten he was supposed to join the workforce today. He had quit the quiet, boring coffee shop 2 weeks ago and applied at a high-end, trendy vintage streetwear boutique in Harajuku. He hadn't even needed to hand over his resume. The manager had taken one look at his face, practically seen dollar signs and a flood of female customers, and hired him on the spot. Ren checked the clock on the microwave. It was 8:45 a.m. I'll be there, Ren said smoothly, easily slipping into his customer service persona. 10 minutes early. Good boy. See you then. The line clicked dead. Ren tossed the phone back onto the counter and let out a long sigh, looking down at the matte black blade in his hand. He had a problem. He definitely couldn't walk through the crowded streets of Tokyo or work a retail shift holding a 14-inch tactical knife. But he also couldn't just dismiss it back into the system's dimensional inventory. The Wraith's Fong only granted him the ability to see cursed energy and spirits as long as the hilt maintained physical contact with his body. Without it, he was flying completely blind in a city crawling with invisible monsters. "Guess we're doing this the hard way," Ren muttered. He walked over to the bathroom cabinet and dug out a thick roll of white athletic tape. Stripping off his t-shirt, Ren stood in front of the bathroom mirror. His physique hadn't bulked up into some absurd bodybuilder shape, but the muscle density had fundamentally changed. He looked lean, tightly coiled, and functionally perfect. He pressed the flat, unadorned scabbard of the tanto diagonally against his lower back, just above his belt line. Gripping the tape, he tightly wrapped it around his torso several times, securing the weapon firmly against his spine. He adjusted the angle carefully, ensuring that the leather-wrapped hilt of the blade pressed directly against the bare skin of his side. The tape held firm. He twisted at the waist, testing his mobility. The new Zenin muscle memory automatically adjusted his posture, making the rigid weapon feel like a natural extension of his body rather than an obstruction. Ren grabbed a fresh, slightly oversized black graphic tee from his dresser and threw it on, followed by a loose, unbuttoned flannel shirt. He turned sideways in the mirror. Between the layered streetwear and the natural curve of his spine, the weapon was completely invisible. Unless someone physically tackled him, no one would ever know he was armed. He grabbed his keys, took one last look at the broken chunk of marble sitting in the trash can, and headed for the door. Stepping out of the apartment building, Ren had mentally braced himself to see a world crawling with monsters. But as he walked toward the station with the wraith's fang pressed firmly against his spine, the reality was actually much more eerie. Tokyo looked exactly the same. There were no grotesque spirits gnawing on parked bicycles or looming over the crowds from street lamps. It stood to reason, vibrant, bustling districts rarely birthed such horrors. Cursed spirits did not thrive on the superficial excitement of Harajuku. They congealed in the stillness, within the sterile halls of hospitals, the high-pressure corridors of schools, and the forgotten, shadow-choked corners where human misery is left to rot. The fact that the monsters were out there, hidden in the shadows rather than out in the open, somehow made it worse. By the time he got to Harajuku, the real struggle wasn't his new sight. It was his body. In the back room of the vintage streetwear boutique, Ren picked up a thick wooden hanger and squeezed the hook to slide it into a denim jacket. Snap! The thick wood instantly splintered into 3 pieces in his hand, the metal hook bending at a horrific angle. Ren froze, staring down at the jagged splinters in his palm. He hadn't even applied pressure. He let out a long, slow breath, tossing the broken pieces into the trash. 5% strength. Do not destroy the merchandise. He spent the next hour out on the floor moving with agonizing, deliberate slowness. The manager's hiring strategy was clearly paying off. Almost every female customer who walked through the door did a double take when they saw him neatly folding shirts near the front display. He was successfully not breaking anything for a solid 20 minutes when the front bell chimed again. Ren glanced up, his customer service smile already in place. Walking through the door was a girl with short, orange hair, wearing a dark skirt and a casual cropped jacket. She looked incredibly annoyed, aggressively clutching a shopping bag and muttering under her breath. Swear to God, just because Maki isn't there to babysit them, that stupid panda goes completely feral, the girl grumbled, aggressively flipping through a rack of vintage leather jackets. And Fushiguro is just sitting there brooding.
I'm transferring.
Tokyo was supposed to be glamorous, not a depressing petting zoo. Ren's hands paused on the sweater he was folding. He definitely recognized the complaints. Nobara Kujisaki stormed deeper into the boutique, aggressively flipping through a rack of vintage leather jackets to blow off steam. She was visibly frustrated, looking for something to make her feel like a sophisticated Tokyo City girl again after getting beaten into the dirt all morning. Ren stepped away from his display table and walked over, carefully maintaining his customer service smile and keeping his movements measured. Can I help you find anything specific today? Ren asked, keeping his tone perfectly polite and professional. Or are we just browsing? Nobara snapped her head up, a sharp, defensive retort already loaded on her tongue. Look, I don't need any. She stopped dead. Her brown eyes widened slightly as she actually looked at him. The aggressive, bossy persona that she constantly wore like armor immediately short-circuited. Ren's preternaturally handsome trait hit her at point-blank range. Standing there in his layered streetwear, he looked exactly like the kind of effortlessly cool Tokyo guy she had always dreamed of meeting when she left the countryside. A sudden, bright pink flush dusted her cheeks. She quickly dropped the sleeve of the jacket she was aggressively crushing. Nobara stammered, her voice dropping an entire octave into something suspiciously polite. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her fierce composure. I'm just browsing, obviously. Of course, Ren nodded respectfully, maintaining a professional distance. If you're looking for a statement piece, that oversized fit works, but you seem like someone who could pull off something a bit more structured. Nobara's eyes practically sparkled at the validation. You think so? She asked, desperately trying to sound aloof. Ren turned and carefully slid a sleek, crimson-cropped jacket off a high-display rack, handing it to her. This one is pretty popular. Feel free to try it on. Nobara took the jacket, immediately slipping it on and checking herself in the nearby full-length mirror. Ren was entirely right. It looked incredible on her, perfectly matching her fierce energy. Not bad, she murmured, admiring her reflection while trying to suppress a massive grin. She looked back at him, her confidence returning. You actually have decent taste. Better than the usual retail workers around here. Just doing my job, Ren replied mildly, gesturing toward the front register. I can ring that up for you whenever you're ready. He walked her over to the counter. As he carefully folded the jacket, making absolutely sure not to accidentally rip the fabric with his new strength, he rang it up and bagged it. Nobara watched him, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the glass. A sudden, bold idea seemed to cross her mind. You know, Nobara started, flipping her orange hair over her shoulder and giving him a pointed look. Tokyo fashion changes super fast. It's exhausting trying to keep track of what's actually good in these boutiques. It can be, Ren agreed neutrally, sliding the bag across the counter, right? So, she leaned against the counter, trying to look incredibly casual despite the lingering pink on her cheeks. You should probably give me your line ID, or your number, just so I can, text you to see if you get any more good imported stuff in. Strictly for shopping recommendations, obviously.
Rain internally panicked.
He had just spent an incredibly intimate night with Maki, and now her fiery, volatile junior was demanding his number under the thin veil of fashion advice. I actually don't give out my personal number, Ren deflected smoothly, maintaining his polite retail smile. He grabbed a sleek black business card from the display on the counter and slid it across the glass toward her. But you can always call the store's main line. I work Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'd be happy to set aside new arrivals for you. Nobara stared at the generic store card for a second, her eye twitching slightly. She snatched it off the counter, clearly miffed that the cool Tokyo guy hadn't immediately fallen over himself to hand over his digits. Whatever, Nobara huffed, grabbing her shopping bag. I have very high standards anyway. Have a great day, Ren called out pleasantly. He watched her stomp out of the store, the bell chiming loudly behind her. Ren let out a long, heavy sigh of relief, dropping his head into his hands. If Maki ever found out he had accidentally charmed her junior, he was going to be completely dead. The rest of the shift was a grueling exercise in extreme self-control. By the time the manager finally flipped the open sign to closed and locked the glass doors, Ren felt more mentally exhausted than he had after 4 rounds with Maki. spending 8 hours actively suppressing the urge to accidentally rip the cash register out of the counter or crush the card reader into plastic confetti took a massive toll on his focus. "Great first day, hotshot," the manager called out from the back office, waving a stack of receipts. "I haven't seen sales numbers like this on a weekday in months. See you on Thursday." "Have a good night," Ren called back, grabbing his jacket. Before stepping out, he reached into his pocket and pulled a standard black surgical mask over the lower half of his face. It was an absolute necessity. The cool evening air of central Tokyo was a massive relief after 8 hours trapped in the stuffy, heavily perfumed boutique. Ren walked down the bustling sidewalk, the lower half of his face safely hidden behind the black surgical mask. His preternaturally handsome trait was a literal hazard in a fashion district like Harajuku. He had spent the entire day fending off aggressive flirting and dodging requests for his line ID. He kept his head down, the glow of his smartphone illuminating his eyes as he mindlessly scrolled through an article just to avoid making eye contact with the crowds. Despite the physical relief of the heavenly restriction, the sheer mental tax of consciously suppressing his strength all day had left him drained. He was too focused on not accidentally crushing his phone screen to pay proper attention to the flow of foot traffic. Thump. Ren collided solidly with a shoulder. It wasn't the soft, yielding bump of a typical pedestrian. Felt like walking into a brick wall. "Oh, my bad, man," Ren muttered automatically, slipping easily into his polite, customer service voice. He pocketed his phone and looked up, raising a hand in a casual apology. "Wasn't watching where I was." The words died in his throat. Standing directly in front of him, looking entirely out of place amidst the trendy Shibuya crowd, was a tall man draped in traditional Buddhist monk robes. He had long, dark hair tied half up, a serene, dangerously calm smile resting on his face, and a very distinct, jagged line of surgical stitches running horizontally across his forehead. "Too." Ren let his gaze drift just a fraction of an inch over the monk's shoulder. Standing right behind Geto was a literal walking natural disaster. There was a short, hunched figure with a single massive eye and a volcano for a head, puffing faint wisps of smoke into the cool Tokyo air. Next to him loomed a towering, muscular monstrosity with branch-like protrusions growing out of its eye sockets, wrapped in pale rags. And hovering just beside them, draped in a white sheet, was a bizarre, bright red octopus-like creature with stark, unblinking eyes and black-tipped tentacles. They were special grade curses. 3 of them, just standing casually on a Shibuya sidewalk. "Ah, man, totally my fault," Ren said, his voice muffled perfectly by the black surgical mask. He let out a sheepish, slightly awkward chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "Wasn't watching where I was going at all." Geto's serene, closed-eye smile didn't waver. He tilted his head slightly, his dark robes shifting in the evening breeze. "It is quite all right," he replied smoothly, his voice pleasant and disarming. "The streets are quite crowded during these times. Do be careful." Yeah, for sure," Ren mumbled, playing the polite but eager to leave civilian to perfection. He dug a hand into his jacket pocket. He carefully bypassed his phone and his keys, his fingers brushing against a small foil-wrapped chocolate he had grabbed from the boutique's break room. With perfectly practiced nonchalance, Ren pulled the chocolate out and held it up toward Geto. "Here," Ren said, offering an easy, apologetic smile that reached his eyes above the mask. "Peace offering for bumping into you. Have a good night, man." Geto blinked, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features for a fraction of a second before his calm smile returned. He reached out, his long fingers plucking the small candy from Ren's palm. "How thoughtful." "Thank you," Geto murmured.
"No sweat," Ren replied.
He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, adjusted his posture to look perfectly relaxed, and stepped forward. He merged back into the flow of the Shibuya crowd, letting the sea of people swallow him up. Behind him, the group of curses stood in silence for a moment. Geto looked down at the small, cheap chocolate in his palm, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. "How amusing," Geto murmured, effortlessly peeling back the foil with his thumb. But Jogo wasn't smiling. The short, volcano-headed curse turned his single, massive eye to glare into the sea of pedestrians, trying to track the teenagers retreating back. A thin, irritated wisp of dark, sulfuric smoke hissed from the crater on his head. "Geto," Jogo rasped, his voice grinding like tectonic plates. "That monkey. What about him?" Geto asked mildly, popping the cheap chocolate into his mouth. Jogo's singular pupil narrowed into a sharp, vertical slit, his heavy cursed energy spiking just a fraction. "Did he see me?" His eyes were staring straight ahead, but right before he bumped into you, his foot shifted. He altered his stride perfectly to avoid stepping on Dagon's tentacles. And he didn't brush against Hanami either. Hovering beside them under its white sheet, the red octopus creature let out a soft, bubbling noise of confusion, blinking its dark eyes. "A monkey with absolutely zero cursed energy?" Geto replied smoothly, turning away from the crowd. "Highly unlikely, Jogo. It was a mere coincidence. Tokyo is full of lucky fools who avoid death every single day without even realizing it." Jogo ground his teeth. The ambient temperature around him flared by several degrees, causing a nearby businessman to unconsciously shiver and hurriedly cross the street to avoid the sudden, suffocating heat. "I don't like it," Jogo growled, his hands curling into fists. "I should burn him to ash right now just to be sure." "You will do no such thing." "Not yet," Geto said. His serene smile didn't vanish, but his tone dropped into something much colder and far more authoritative. "We are here on business, remember?" Geto gestured down the brightly lit Shibuya street, nodding toward a generic, neon-lit family restaurant resting on the corner. "We need to sit down, have some tea, and actually discuss the conditions for our alliance." 2 miles away, tucked beneath the heavy concrete arch of a train overpass, Ren finally stopped walking. The rhythmic, deafening clatter of a commuter train passing overhead drowned out the city noise, but it did nothing to quiet the frantic hammering against his ribs. Ren leaned heavily against the cold, graffiti-covered pillar, sliding down just a fraction as the adrenaline completely dumped from his system. He let his head fall back against the concrete with a dull thud. "Damn my absolute, god-awful luck," Ren muttered, his voice echoing faintly in the damp shadows of the underpass. He reached around to his lower back, his fingers pressing against his jacket to feel the solid, reassuring shape of the Wraith's fang taped to his spine. It was the only reason he had seen them. Without the blade's ocular resonance, he would have walked straight through Hanami or Dagon like a completely blind idiot. He squeezed his eyes shut, replaying the encounter. Jogo had definitely noticed him. A special grade curse with centuries of combat experience wasn't going to just ignore a human who perfectly sidestepped invisible tentacles. Thank God Kenjaku, Geto, whatever, was too obsessed with his own grand schemes to care about a random civilian handing him cheap chocolate, and Ren knew exactly where they were going. The family restaurant. The meeting where Jogo would demand to fight Satoru Gojo, officially kicking off the absolute nightmare timeline of the Shibuya incident. "I need to get stronger. Fast." Ren breathed out into the cold air. Pushing himself off the concrete pillar, he shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets and started walking the last few dimly lit blocks toward his apartment. He had just turned the corner onto his street when his phone vibrated violently against his thigh. Ren pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen. "Maki." He let out a long, grounding exhale, forcing the lingering tension out of his shoulders, then swiped to answer. He instantly slipped the clueless, normal boyfriend mask back into place. "Hey," Ren answered, his voice dropping into its usual relaxed, teasing drawl. You miss me already? Hasn't even been 12 hours. Shut up, idiot. Maki's voice crackled through the speaker. She sounded exhausted, but there was that familiar, fond edge to her tone that she only ever used with him. Did you make it home from your new job? And more importantly, did you actually eat a real dinner? Or are you back to inhaling convenience store onigiri? Ren smirked, stepping into the lobby of his apartment building. I'll have you know I bought a very premium, high-quality bento box. It had real vegetables in it and everything. I'll believe that when I see it, he scoffed. A heavy, metallic clank echoed through her end of the line, the distinct sound of her dropping a heavy cursed tool onto a weapons rack. She let out a heavy sigh that sounded like it carried the weight of the entire world.
Listen, ren.
I'm calling because my schedule just got completely wrecked. Ren paused at his door, sliding his key into the lock. What's wrong? Track coach on another power trip. Worse, Maki grumbled. The school administration is forcing us to participate in this massive inter-school tournament thing next month. It's against the Kyoto branch campus, and their principal is a total hard-ass. Ren pushed his door open, flicking on the living room lights. The Goodwill event. Because our upperclassmen are either suspended or useless, it falls on me to whip our first years into shape so we don't get completely embarrassed, Maki continued. Extra training, sparring, tactical reviews. I'm going to be practically living on the training field. Ren tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter, exactly where they had been the night before. So, you're not going to be able to sneak away for a while. Yeah, Maki muttered. The fierce, demanding sorcerer suddenly sounded incredibly small and hesitant.
I'm sorry.
I know we just, last night, I didn't want to just dip out immediately after. Ren's chest tightened slightly at the genuine guilt in her voice. He leaned back against the kitchen counter, letting out a soft, reassuring chuckle to completely mask the lingering adrenaline from his near-death encounter in Shibuya. Hey, don't apologize, Ren said, his voice dropping into that warm, easy register that always seemed to soothe her. You've got a tournament to win and first years to terrorize. I get it. You have to go be the boss. He could hear a soft, relieved exhale through the speaker, the tension bleeding out of her end of the line. Though, Ren continued, a slow, familiar smirk spreading across his face despite the empty apartment. He tilted his head, leaning into the teasing persona. I really don't mind you sending me your cute photos during this time, though. Just to tide me over until you break out of lockdown. The line went completely dead silent for a full 3 seconds. Ren could practically feel the temperature spike through the phone. He could perfectly picture the violent, brilliant shade of crimson currently overtaking her entire face, from her cheeks all the way to the tips of her ears. You. Maki sputtered, her tough, demanding persona instantly and completely breaking. I'm in a combat training camp. Idiot, I don't have time to take cute photos.
Trædik, ren deadpan smoothly.
Guess I'll just have to rely on my memories of that new sweater. Or what was underneath it. Shut up, she hissed, though the lethal edge was entirely ruined by how breathless and incredibly flustered she sounded. The sound of her aggressively shifting her heavy weapon bag echoed through the receiver as she clearly tried to hide her burning face from whoever might be walking past the armory. She hesitated for a split second, the heavy silence stretching between them. I will try, she mumbled, her voice dropping into an impossibly small, painfully shy whisper. Before Ren could even formulate a response to that absolute victory, she immediately panicked and stabbed the end call button. The line clicked dead with a sharp beep. Ren pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the call-ended screen. A genuine, bright laugh escaped his lips. The laughter slowly faded into the quiet hum, leaving Rin staring down at the darkened screen of his phone. He tossed the phone onto the low green sofa and dragged both hands down his face, letting out a groan that sounded entirely too exhausted for a 17-year-old. I have a massive problem, he thought, staring blankly at the ceiling. His mind violently flashed back to the Shibuya crosswalk, Jogo's suffocating heat, Hanami's towering, monstrous frame, the eerie, stitched smile on Geto's face. He had survived purely on dumb luck and the Wraith's Fong. But his luck was notoriously terrible. If he just happened to bump into Kenjaku's crew on a random Tuesday, who was to say his bad luck wouldn't have him crossing paths with Mahito tomorrow? Or worse, what if he stumbled into Sukuna's line of sight once the Shibuya incident actually kicked off? A half-completed heavenly restriction was a massive step up from being a fragile civilian. It gave him the physical specs to run away, maybe even survive a glancing blow from a grade 1 curse. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. If he wanted to actually protect Maki, if he wanted to survive the impending meat grinder of their world, he needed curse techniques. He needed versatility. He needed to exploit the absolute hell out of his system. System, Rin murmured. The translucent blue panel materialized in the center of his vision. He focused on the very first notification he had received yesterday. Core ability unlocked. Inheritance via intimacy. Description. The user possesses the unique ability to permanently copy and assimilate the innate curse techniques, cursed energy traits, or heavenly restrictions of others. Condition for activation. The user must engage in the deepest act of physical intimacy intercourse with the target. Run stared at the floating blue text. Cheating was entirely off the table. He couldn't do it. He had just spent months breaking down Maki's walls, getting her to trust him enough to let her guard down. The idea of sneaking around behind her back and using another girl, like he had briefly considered with Nobara, just for a power-up made him feel physically sick, which left only one terrifying, borderline suicidal alternative. I have to ask her permission. Run let out a hollow, completely unhinged chuckle, burying his face in his hands again. He mentally tried to script the conversation. Hey, Maki. Crazy day at work today. Also, I have a magical video game screen in my head that copies superpowers, but only if I sleep with the sorcerer who has them. Anyway, to make sure you don't die next month, do I have your blessing to hit on your female classmates? He would be dead before the sentence finished. She would just strangle him with her bare hands, or maybe run him through with the very spear she was doing maintenance on right now. But what other choice did he have? The Jujutsu world didn't care about their romance, only respected absolute, overwhelming power. Okay, think, Ran, he muttered, pacing across the hardwood floor of the living room, his new combat-honed muscles moving with restless energy. He couldn't just drop this on her out of nowhere. First, he had to drop the clueless civilian act. He had to show her his new physical strength, let her see that he understood her world, and prove that his ability is real. If he approached it purely as a tactical necessity, a completely clinical, emotionless strategy to build an arsenal capable of killing special grades, she might possibly consider it without immediately castrating him. Maki was a pragmatist. She understood sacrifice and survival better than anyone, but she was also a fiercely proud, intensely territorial Zenin who had just given him her virginity. Sharing him wasn't going to go over well, even if the fate of the world depended on it. Rin stopped pacing, looking at the spot on the sofa where they had spent the evening. He let out a long, heavy breath, the crushing weight of the coming weeks pressing down on his shoulders. I'm going to need a miracle, he whispered to the empty room. Across the city, safely secured within the walls of Tokyo Jujutsu High, Nobara Kujisaki was currently fighting a brutal, exhausting battle of her own. She was sitting cross-legged on her dorm room bed, fresh out of the shower. The sleek crimson cropped jacket she had bought earlier was draped carefully over the back of her desk chair, looking every bit as expensive and aggressively chic as she had hoped. But right now, her attention wasn't on the jacket. It was entirely focused on the sleek black business card resting in the dead center of her mattress. Or, more accurately, she glared at the 10-digit personal cell phone number she had just successfully scammed out of his manager. Nobara glared at the glowing screen of her smartphone as if it were a grade 1 cursed spirit that was actively refusing to be exorcised. She had the device gripped tightly in both hands, an empty text thread blinking mockingly at her in the dim light of her dorm room. Getting the number had actually been pathetically easy. Her pride simply hadn't been able to handle him sliding a generic store card across the counter and politely brushing her off. So, exactly 10 minutes after she left the boutique, she had marched into a quiet alley, dialed the store's main line, and put on her best, most tearful, frantic rich girl voice. She had spun a desperate tale to the manager about how she took off her grandmother's priceless heirloom ring to try on the jacket, left it on the counter, and the incredibly handsome, dark-haired employee must have accidentally swept it into his own pocket while cleaning up the register. The manager, terrified of losing a high-paying VIP customer and facing a disastrous online review, had completely folded. She had handed over Ren's personal cell number without a second thought, so she could contact him immediately before he got on his train to check his pockets. It was a flawless tactical victory, but now that she actually had the number, she had absolutely no idea what to do with it. "Hey, it's the girl from the boutique." She typed it out with her thumbs, stared at it for exactly 2 seconds, and then aggressively mashed the backspace button until the screen was blank again. "Ah, no. Too boring. I sound like I'm filling out a customer feedback survey," she muttered to herself, her nose wrinkling in deep disgust. "You should have just given it to me when I asked. Needy. Gross." She hammered the backspace key until the cursor blinked at her from a completely empty text box once again. With a frustrated groan that bordered on a battle cry, Nobara chucked the smartphone across her dorm room. It bounced harmlessly off a pile of laundry and landed face down on the rug. "What am I even doing?" Nobara huffed, crossing her arms and letting herself fall backward onto her mattress with a dramatic bounce. She stared up at the ceiling, thoroughly annoyed with herself. Since when does Nobara Kujisaki agonize over a text message? "I am a prize. I am the undisputed jewel of Tokyo. The jewel of Tokyo does not chase, and she absolutely, unequivocally does not text first." It was a matter of basic principle. The natural order of the universe dictated that guys tripped over themselves to get her attention, shower her with compliments, and offer to carry her shopping bags. That was how the system worked. Going out of her way to message a guy who had the sheer audacity to brush her off with a generic store card? Unthinkable. It was pathetic. It was bad for her brand. If he has functional eyes, he knows exactly what he missed out on, she declared to the empty room, nodding to herself in firm agreement. "I've already done my part. I executed a flawless covert operation just to give him a second chance. The ball is entirely in his court." She conveniently chose to ignore the glaring logistical flaw in her logic. He literally did not have her number and had absolutely no idea she had just successfully socially engineered his manager to get his. Minor details. She rolled over, burying her face in her plush pillow. She was going to go to sleep, forget all about the stupidly handsome retail worker with the unfair cheekbones, and go back to effortlessly exorcising curses tomorrow. She had standards to uphold. 10 seconds passed in total silence. Slowly, Nobara lifted her head. Her eyes narrowed, piercing through the dim light of the room as she glared intensely at the phone resting on the rug. The crisp night air of Tokyo bit at Ren's face as he stepped off the main, brightly lit thoroughfare and slipped into the suffocating shadows of a narrow alleyway. The glow of the city quickly faded behind him, replaced by the damp, metallic scent of stagnant water and neglected garbage. It was well past midnight. If his meta-knowledge of the timeline was correct, right about now, a certain arrogant, volcano-headed special grade curse was getting absolutely dismantled by Satoru Gojo somewhere out on a deserted highway. With the heavy hitters occupied and Kenjaku undoubtedly observing the spectacle, the streets were temporarily devoid of any immediate, catastrophic threats. It was the perfect window to see exactly what he was working with. Ren reached under the back of his loose flannel shirt. He gripped the thick white athletic tape he had used to secure the weapon to his spine. With a sharp, deliberate pull, he ripped the tape away, freeing the flat, unadorned scabbard. He brought the weapon around to his front and wrapped his fingers firmly around the leather-wrapped hilt. "All right," Ren muttered, his voice dropping into a low. He brought his free hand up, pressing his thumb against his knuckles and cracking his fingers one by one. The sharp pops echoed loudly against the damp brick walls. Let's see what a physical gift actually feels like. He didn't have to wait long. Further down the alley, where the shadows pooled into an impenetrable black mass, the static-like cursed energy began to rapidly condense. A grotesque, sickening gurgle echoed from the darkness. A grade 3 cursed spirit dragged itself out of the gloom. It looked like a bloated, misshapen amalgamation of rotting flesh and discarded tires, possessing far too many multi-jointed legs that clicked against the asphalt. Its bulbous, asymmetrical eyes locked onto Ren, sensing absolutely no significant cursed energy beyond the blade he held. To the spirit, he looked like an easy, defenseless meal. The curse let out a high-pitched, screeching wail and launched itself forward, its many legs propelling it over the damp pavement with startling speed. The bloated mass of rotting flesh and tires closed the distance in less than a second. There was no hesitation, no conscious thought process analyzing the threat or deciding how to counter it. His body simply moved. Pivoting smoothly on his heel, the creature sailed past him. Its jagged claws tore harmlessly through the empty air where his chest had been a fraction of a second before. The monster crashed heavily into the damp brick wall, letting out a confused, wet gurgle. Before it could untangle its many legs, the matte black, single-edged blade in his hand blurred. A clean, horizontal slash tore through the creature's thick side. Felt like cutting through wet paper. The tactical weapon sheared through the cursed energy with zero resistance, leaving a trailing arc of dark static in its wake. The monster shrieked, whipping a heavy, tire-like appendage toward his head in a desperate counterattack. Ducking effortlessly beneath the wild swing, pure instinct guided his arm. A swift, brutal upward thrust drove the 14-inch blade directly up through the creature's lower jaw and deep into what passed for its skull. Twisting the hilt sharply, he pulled the weapon free. The grade 3 curse immediately stopped thrashing. Its bulbous eyes rolled back before the entire grotesque mass crumbled, turning into a pile of dissolving ash and fading purple static. Silence rushed back into the damp alleyway. Flicking the empty air to clear the blade, he stared at the dissipating ash. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 5 seconds. His breathing remained completely steady, and his heart rate hadn't even spiked. A sharp, familiar ping echoed in his mind. The dim alley was suddenly illuminated by the crisp, bright glow of a translucent blue interface materializing right in his line of sight. Achievement unlocked. First cursed spirit kill, grade 3. Reward acquired, 500 system points. Ren stared at the glowing blue text hanging in the damp alleyway. Slowly, an eyebrow crept up his forehead, the adrenaline from the brief fight already completely gone. Achievements? He muttered, his voice flat. The system interface didn't respond, simply hovering there with its crisp, digital glow. Crossing his arms, his mind quickly broke down the information. 500 points for a grade 3 curse. It wasn't a bad payout for 5 seconds of work, but the exact phrasing caught his attention. If the system was tracking the specific grade for the milestone, the math was pretty obvious. Tilting his head, he looked back at the dissolving ash on the pavement. Would the reward have been bigger if he had aimed higher? If he had managed to somehow take down a grade 2, or even a grade 1 for his very first kill, would that 500 have been 1,000? 5,000? It made sense. A system like this would naturally scale its payouts based on the actual threat level. Letting out a short sigh, Run ran a hand through his dark hair. There was no point stressing over missed points now. Taking on a grade 1 right out of the gate with 0 actual field experience would have been suicide anyway, even with the downloaded muscle memory. A smaller notification window suddenly popped up directly beneath the main reward screen. System notice. Point allocation. Current system points can be exchanged to upgrade the tier of equipped curse tools. Additional storefronts and point exchange features will become available as the user unlocks higher levels. Glancing down at the tanto resting easily in his grip, he ran his thumb over the hilt. The weapon was currently just a grade 2 curse tool. Upgrading it into something that could actually do real damage against the heavy hitters was going to cost a hell of a lot more than 500 points. Which meant one very obvious thing. A single garbage tier curse wasn't going to cut it. He needed to farm. Flicking his wrist, the glowing screens minimized and vanished, plunging the damp alleyway back into its normal shadows. He carefully resheathed the dark blade and adjusted his flannel shirt to hide it against his lower back. Preparing for the impending disaster meant putting in the work. Stepping out of the alley and back onto the dimly lit street, his eyes scanned the quiet city blocks for his next target. The neon lights of a closed convenience store buzzed faintly overhead as Ren kept to the quieter backstreets. As he scanned the dark gaps between buildings for any lingering traces of cursed energy, a practical question hit him. "System," he murmured, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't carry in the crisp night air. How much exactly to bump the Wraithsfang up from a grade 2 to a grade 1 tool? The blue panel flickered effortlessly back into his field of vision. Upgrade cost. Wraithsfang, grade 2, dash, grade 1 5,000 system points. Run let out a long, slow exhale, a cloud of condensation pluming in front of his face. 5,000. He glanced back at his current balance of 500. Wait! Ren frowned, catching a glaring flaw in his own logic. System, that 500 I just got, that was a one-time payout for the first kill achievement, wasn't it? How much is a standard grade 3 kill actually worth? The blue panel blinked. A new line of text quickly typed itself out under his balance. Standard extermination yield. Grade 3 curse spirit equals 5 system points. Ren stopped walking. He stared at the glowing blue 5. 5! He said out loud, his voice flat. He did the math in his head. 1,000 grade 3 curses. He would have to hunt down 1,000 of these things just to upgrade one knife. He swiped his hand through the air, dismissing the screen. He needed to make sure it wasn't a glitch. He spent the next 40 minutes walking through the worst parts of the district, actively looking for trouble. He found 2 more curses. One was a swarm of things that looked like giant, rotting centipedes clinging to a restaurant dumpster. The other was a swollen, twitching mass wedged behind a broken vending machine. He killed both of them. It wasn't even a fight. His body just knew what to do. Step in / pivot, step back. The dark blade cut through them easily, leaving only dissolving ash on the concrete. He wiped the blade on his jeans, sheathed it against his spine, and called up the system again. Current balance, 510 system points. Ren let out a long, heavy sigh. He walked over to a concrete barrier near a closed gas station and sat down. The cold night air stung his face as he rested his elbows on his knees and dropped his head into his hands. Farming was completely useless. He didn't have the time to roam Tokyo every night acting like a garbage collector for weak curses. Ren pushed himself off the cold concrete barrier. The damp chill of the Tokyo night had finally seeped through his flannel shirt, settling deep into his bones. Ren paused at the edge of a crosswalk, the flashing "Don't Walk" sign casting a stark red glow over the empty street. He pulled his phone out, half expecting it to be a notification from his new job. He unlocked the screen. Line message, Maki, attachment, 1 image.
Ren fros.
The red light of the crosswalk reflected off his dark eyes as his thumb hovered over the notification. She actually did it. He tapped the screen. The message thread opened, and the image loaded. Ren's breath hitched, completely dying in his throat. It was clearly taken in one of the harsh, white-tiled bathrooms of the Jujutsu High dorms. Maki was standing in front of the mirror, holding her phone up with one hand. She hadn't bothered to put on anything overly complicated or traditionally lingerie-esque. Instead, she was wearing the exact same oversized black t-shirt of his that she had claimed as her own the night before. But the way she was wearing it was devastating. She had purposefully pulled the wide collar of the t-shirt down, letting it hang completely off one bare, athletic shoulder. The fabric draped loosely, dangerously low over her chest, hinting heavily at the fact that she wasn't wearing anything underneath it. But it wasn't just the sheer intimacy of the outfit that made Ren's heart slam against his ribs. It was her expression. Maki wasn't looking at the camera. Her face was turned slightly away, her eyes staring hard at the tiled floor as if she were trying to set it on fire. Her face, her ears, and the exposed skin of her neck were burning a brilliant, violent shade of crimson. And right there, perfectly framed by the pulled-down collar of the black shirt, was the dark, bruised reddish-purple love bite he had left on her pulse point. 3 text bubbles rapidly popped up beneath the photo in quick succession. Maki, don't get used to this. Maki, if you save this, I will break every single bone in your body. Maki, I'm unsending it in exactly 60 seconds, idiot. Ren stood completely paralyzed on the empty sidewalk. The cold night air suddenly felt entirely suffocating. He stared at the image, his heart hammering against his ribs. 60 seconds. His thumb moved with the kind of blinding speed usually reserved for life-or-death combat, pressing the side buttons simultaneously. The screen flashed white, capturing the screenshot and securing the image in his camera roll before she could even think about deleting it. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Ren tapped the text box. He let his fingers type out the familiar, effortless teasing she expected.
Ren. Screenshot saved.
Deal with it, Ren. Also, I think you completely misunderstood the definition of a cute photo, Ren. But never mind. I'm definitely not complaining. I like this version a lot more. Ren, if possible next time, maybe just drop the shirt entirely? Just a suggestion. He hit send, leaning back against the metal pole of a street lamp as he waited for the inevitable explosion. It didn't take long. The read receipt popped up almost instantly, followed by the 3 little typing dots flashing furiously on the screen. Maki, I am going to murder you. Maki, I am leaving the dorms right now. You are a dead man. Maki, there won't be a next time, you pervert. Run couldn't help the genuine, soft laugh that escaped his lips, the sound echoing quietly in the empty street. He could practically see her pacing around her dorm room, completely flustered, steam practically coming out of her ears as she gripped her phone. Ren, looking forward to it. Go get some sleep, boss. Good luck with your tournament preparation. The typing indicator stopped. A long minute passed. The aggressive, defensive anger melted away just as quickly as it had arrived. Maki. Good night, idiot. Ren slipped his phone back into his pocket. He pushed off the cold metal of the street lamp and started walking the remaining blocks to his apartment. He unlocked the deadbolt to his apartment and stepped inside, tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. The silence of the empty rooms was deafening. Ren walked into the bathroom and flipped on the harsh overhead light. He pulled his flannel and t-shirt over his head. The next morning, the alarm buzzed at 8 a.m. sharp. Ren hit the off button and sat up, expecting the usual lingering soreness from keeping pace with a superhuman the night before last. There was nothing. His heavenly restriction processed rest with terrifying efficiency. His muscles were completely repaired. His mind felt razor-sharp, and the deep fatigue had vanished. He pushed himself out of bed, the movement effortless and silent. He moved through his morning routine quickly. Shower, black t-shirt, dark denim jacket. The only new addition was the non-negotiable ritual, securing the matte black scabbard of the Wraith's Fang against his lower spine with a fresh roll of athletic tape. He checked his reflection, twisting at the waist to ensure the weapon remained completely concealed under the heavy denim. The blade's hilt pressed firmly against his skin, keeping the ocular resonance trait active. Grabbing his keys and his black surgical mask, he headed out the door. The commute to Harajuku was relatively smooth. He kept his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He spotted a few localized clusters of negative energy, the usual misery radiating from exhausted salarymen, but no actual curses. He arrived at the vintage streetwear boutique right at 9:55 a.m. The familiar smell of expensive leather and aged denim hit him as he pushed through the glass doors. "Look who came back," the manager called out from the main register, looking up from a clipboard with a sharp grin. "I was half expecting you to ghost us after dealing with the Harajuku crowd on your first day. You're early. I told you I was reliable," Ren replied smoothly, pulling his black mask down to his chin. "Good. Grab the steamer from the back room. We got a new shipment of imported silk jackets, and I need them on the floor by 10. "On it," Ren said, heading toward the staff area. The rest of the shift went by in a blur of expensive fabric and forced smiles. Ren managed to get through the entire day without accidentally tearing a single imported silk jacket or crushing the intricately carved wooden hangers. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, the manager was practically glowing, waving him off with a promise of premium weekend shifts. Stepping out into the cool evening air of Harajuku, Ren immediately pulled his black surgical mask up over his nose. The neon lights of the district were flickering to life, painting the crowded sidewalks in vibrant shades of pink and blue. He didn't head straight for the train station. Instead, he took a sharp right, purposely weaving away from the main thoroughfare and diving into the labyrinth of narrow, dimly lit back alleys that spiderwebbed behind the high-end boutiques and crepe stands. The misery of retail workers, the jealousy of window shoppers, and the general exhaustion of the city pooled heavily in these dark, neglected spaces. Over the next hour and a half, Ron spent his all-energy hunting curses. He found a cluster of 3 dog-like grade 4 curses gnawing on a leaking trash bag behind a karaoke bar. He dropped from a fire escape, the matte black blade of the tanto flashing in the dim light. 3 clean, horizontal slashes. 3 piles of dissolving ash. Total time. For seconds. He moved on. He caught a bloated, centipede-like grade 3 trying to drop on him from an awning. He didn't even look up. He just sidestepped, pivoted on his heel, and drove the blade straight up through its segmented underbelly. By the time he reached an abandoned construction site near the edge of Shibuya, he wiped the dark blade clean on his denim jacket and let out a steady breath. He wasn't even sweating. The physical stamina granted by the heavenly restriction was almost comical. Right as he sheathed the Wraith's Fang against his lower back, a sharp, familiar ping echoed in his skull. The alleyway was suddenly bathed in the crisp, translucent blue light of the system interface. Achievement unlocked. Exorcist initiate. Milestone met. 10 cursed spirits eliminated. Reward acquired. 1,000 system points. Ren's eyebrows shot up. 1,000 points. He let out a low whistle, the sound muffled by his black mask. The system really did reward milestones heavily to cut down on the grind. But before he could celebrate, the blue panel flickered, typing out a new line of text in stark, urgent white font. System notice. Next milestone, 100 eliminations. Condition updated. Only cursed spirits of grade 3 or higher will count toward this milestone. Trash mobs, grade 4 and below, will no longer yield milestone progress. Of course, Ren muttered, crossing his arms. Can't just farm the easy ones forever. Ren swiped his hand through the air, dismissing the blue interface. Before the glow could even fully fade from his retinas, his phone vibrated violently against his thigh. BZZZ, BZZZ. The blue panel had barely vanished when Ren's phone buzzed aggressively against his thigh. He pulled it out, squinting at the bright screen in the dark alley. Caller ID Maki. He stared at her name for a long second. The system, the cursed tool taped to his spine, the pile of dissolving ash at his feet. He couldn't hide all of this forever. If he suddenly started dodging special grade curses or accidentally ripping doors off their hinges, Maki's sorcerer instincts would immediately figure it out. It was better to give her a half-truth now to explain the physical changes, while keeping the system and his new ability to see curses a complete secret. He tapped the green button and lifted the phone to his ear. Hey, Ren said, keeping his voice steady. Did you just get off work? Maki asked. Her tone was completely normal, maybe expecting him to tease her about the photo she sent last night. I actually have 5 minutes to breathe before Coach makes us run night drills. Yeah, just left the store, Ren replied. He leaned back against the cool brick wall of the alley, letting out a heavy breath. Listen, Maki, I need to ask you something. It's kind of serious. The line went dead silent. The casual warmth in her voice vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, guarded tone she used when expecting bad news. What's wrong? She asked, her voice dropping lower. Did something happen? Ren ran his free hand through his hair. He needed to play this perfectly, like a confused, slightly panicked civilian who didn't know the first thing about fighting. I don't know, Ren started, forcing a slight waver into his voice. I've been feeling really weird since yesterday morning. Since after we, another stretch of silence. When Maki finally spoke, she sounded incredibly tense. Weird how? Are you sick? Run, if you're hurt. No, not hurt, he cut in quickly. It's the opposite. I feel way too good, like my body is completely weightless. He paused, looking down at his free hand in the shadows. At work today, I went to grab a wooden hanger, and it just snapped into splinters. I didn't even squeeze it. I had to spend the whole shift moving in slow motion, so I didn't break the cash register. He heard a sharp intake of breath through the phone. Maki, Ren continued, pressing the advantage while she was off balance. I feel ridiculously strong, like impossibly strong. Did I catch something from you? Is this some weird side effect of your track practice conditioning? He deliberately kept his words naive, actively avoiding terms like cursed energy or heavenly restriction. Maki didn't answer immediately. Ren could hear the faint rustle of fabric as she likely paced her dorm room, trying to process what he just said. She knew her body was a literal weapon due to her incomplete heavenly restriction. She also knew that the jujutsu world was full of bizarre, impossible anomalies. But transferring physical power through intimacy? Ren, Maki finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper, completely stripped of its usual bossy affection. Are you sure? You aren't just messing with me? I'm literally holding 3 pieces of a pulverized hanger in my jacket pocket right now. Ren lied smoothly, though the event had actually happened. I'm not joking. I feel completely different. What is going on with me? I don't know, she stammered. The fierce, uncompromising sorcerer sounded genuinely lost. That shouldn't be possible. I didn't think I could pass anything to you. Well, something happened, Ren said gently, softening his tone to sound more reassuring than scared. Look, I'm not freaking out. It actually feels pretty great not having a sore back after trying to keep up with you. But I just wanted to tell you. I didn't want to hide it. I'm coming over. Maki didn't leave any room for argument. Her tone was flat, but underneath it, Ren could hear the sudden rush of movement. A locker door slammed in the background. "Tonight?" Ren asked. "Yes, tonight. Night drills are done in an hour." She paused, and the sharp sound of a bag zipper echoed through the speaker. "We aren't prisoners here. Students can leave campus when the day is over. I'll catch the train." Ren leaned his head back against the brick wall of the alley. He nodded. The line went quiet. 2 seconds passed. Then 5.
Reborn.
Maki's voice came back. She dropped her bossy edge and just sounded uncertain. "I'm not hearing an answer. Do you not want me to come? Should I stay here?"
Reborn blinked.
He looked at the dark street in front of him as a stupid realization hit him. He pulled the phone away from his ear for a second, stared at the call screen, and dragged his free hand down his face. No, I'm here," Ren said quickly. He let out a short, embarrassed laugh. "Sorry, I didn't mean to go quiet. I was literally nodding my head." Maki paused. "You were nodding?" "Yeah," Ren sighed, rubbing his forehead. "To a voice call, standing by myself in the street." "My brain is completely fried, Maki." He heard a soft exhale on the other end. The heavy tension broke, replaced by her usual, exasperated huff. "You are an idiot," she muttered, though she sounded relieved. "Try not to break anything else before I get there. Don't touch any more wooden hangers." "I'll keep my hands in my pockets," Ren promised. "I'll order some food. See you soon." "See you." The line clicked dead. Ren lowered the phone, the smile fading from his face. He pushed off the brick wall and immediately started walking fast. He had a lot of work to do before she arrived. Maki tossed her phone onto the mattress. She immediately pulled a small, dark duffel bag from the bottom of her closet and started shoving clothes inside. Her hands moved fast, fueled by adrenaline, but her mind was stuck completely on what Ran had just said. She paused, gripping a folded t-shirt. How is that even possible? Heavenly restrictions were biological curses. You couldn't just transmit superhuman strength through intimacy. It defied every law of jujutsu she had ever learned. But Run had no reason to lie about it. He had sounded genuinely confused, like a completely normal guy who was suddenly terrified of his own hands. She shoved the shirt into the bag and yanked the zipper shut with a sharp pull. She had to see it for herself. Maki slung the duffel bag over her shoulder, but as she reached for the doorknob, her hand stopped. If she just walked out right now, someone was going to notice. The dorms were never actually quiet. Nobara was probably awake, complaining loudly to someone about her lack of a social life. Panda was notorious for wandering the halls at all hours looking for snacks. And then there was Gojo. If Gojo caught her sneaking off campus with an overnight bag, he would ask questions. He wouldn't stop prying until he dug up the truth. And if he found out about Ren, the secret was completely over. Gojo would probably teleport straight into Ren's living room just to introduce himself and cause chaos. Maki rubbed her temples, a dull headache already starting behind her eyes. She couldn't let them find out. Ren was normal. He was safe. She had to keep him completely separate from this dangerous life. She stepped away from the door and scanned her room, looking for a believable excuse. Her eyes landed on the corner by her desk. A long wooden staff leaned against the wall, splintered heavily down the middle from a brutal sparring session earlier that week. Perfect. Maki grabbed the broken wood and slid it into her long tactical weapon case. She zipped it up and strapped the heavy case diagonally across her back. The wide, padded strap completely covered the strap of the smaller duffel bag tucked underneath her jacket. She took a steadying breath, opened her door, and stepped into the hallway. Going somewhere? Maki froze. She looked to her left. Panda was standing near the communal kitchen, holding a large bag of potato chips. He tilted his massive, furry head at her. "Yes," Maki said. She forced her shoulders to relax, easily channeling her usual annoyance. I'm going to the city. It's late, Panda pointed out, chewing loudly. Night drills just ended. Are you running away? No, Maki-san. She reached back and tapped the hard plastic of the weapon case. I snapped my favorite staff on Tuesday. There's a repair contact in Shinjuku who takes early morning walk-ins. I'm going to stay at a hotel near his shop so I can be first in line tomorrow. Panda stopped chewing. He stared at her for a long second, his black, beady eyes giving absolutely nothing away. Maki kept her expression completely blank, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Makes sense, Panda finally said, turning back to his chips. Bring me back some mochi if you pass a bakery. I'm not your delivery service. Maki shot back automatically. She didn't wait for him to say anything else. She turned and walked down the hall toward the exit. She kept her pace perfectly steady, forcing herself not to look back or walk too fast. She didn't drop her guard until she was completely clear of the campus gates. Once her boots hit the dark, paved road leading down toward the train station, she let out a long, shaky breath. The rigid tension finally bled out of her spine. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, the bright screen illuminating the dark street. She had exactly 28 minutes to catch the last train. The lock clicked. Run pushed his apartment door open and stepped inside, shutting it firmly behind him. He checked the time on his phone. He had a little less than an hour before Maki's train arrived. He walked straight into the living room, reaching under his flannel shirt to peel off the thick athletic tape. He pulled the Wraith's Fong free. He looked at the dark scabbard in his hand. Stashing it in a dresser drawer felt too risky. Maki had sharp eyes and combat instincts. If she noticed anything weird and decided to snoop, a grade 2 cursed tool mixed in with his winter sweaters would ruin everything. He needed it completely gone. Inventory, Rin said quietly. The translucent gray grid appeared in the air. He pushed the weapon into the first slot. It vanished instantly. There was no bright flash of light and no sound. It was just gone. Ren let out a breath. That solved his biggest problem, hiding his cursed tool. He stripped off his clothes and threw them straight into the washing machine, dumping in extra detergent to wash away any lingering smell from the dark alleyways. He took a fast shower, scrubbing the street dirt off his skin, and changed into a pair of plain gray sweatpants and a clean white t-shirt. He grabbed his phone from the bathroom counter and quickly ordered a large spread from their favorite local takeout place, timing the delivery to arrive right around the time Maki would get to his door. With the evidence hidden and the food handled, Ren walked back into the living room. He grabbed the remote and dropped heavily onto the low green sofa. He turned the television on and flipped the channel until he found a late-night variety show. A panel of comedians were currently yelling at each other over a spicy food challenge. Ren leaned back against the soft cushions and stretched his legs out. He watched the bright screen, letting the loud, meaningless background noise fill the quiet apartment. The doorbell chimed over the blaring television. Ren checked the time on his phone. 10:15 p.m. Too early for Maki's train, and the takeout wasn't due for another 10 minutes. Maybe the kitchen was fast tonight. He dug his wallet out of his sweatpants, walked to the front door and pulled it open. Hey, just leave it. Ren stopped, his wallet pausing midair. Standing in the hallway wasn't a tired delivery driver. It was Maki. She was wearing her dark jujutsu high jacket left unzipped over a plain white t-shirt, her long tactical weapon case slung securely across her back. In her hands, she held two large, steaming plastic bags that smelled heavily of garlic, fried rice, and spicy pork. You tipped terribly, by the way, Maki deadpanned, holding up the bags. I ran into the guy in the lobby. Figured I'd save him the trip up the stairs. You made record time, Rin said, genuinely surprised. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. I thought you were catching the train. I did. And then I ran the rest of the way from the station, she muttered, stepping past him into the warm apartment. Ren closed the door, the deadbolt clicking shut. He watched as Maki walked straight to the kitchen island. She set the takeout bags down on the marble counter, then let her heavy weapon case slide off her shoulder, letting it hit the hardwood floor with a solid, familiar thud. She didn't take off her jacket. She didn't even look at the food. Maki turned around, crossed her arms over her chest, and fixed him with a stare that could have melted concrete. The fierce, uncompromising sorcerer was back, though her amber eyes were tight with genuine, barely concealed worry. "All right?" Maki said, her voice completely devoid of her usual teasing. "Show me. Tell me exactly what is going on, Ren." Ren shoved his wallet back into his sweatpants, playing the part of the confused, slightly overwhelmed civilian to perfection. He rubbed the back of his neck and let out a hesitant sigh. "I wasn't kidding on the phone, Maki. Started yesterday morning, but I thought it was just adrenaline, or a really good night's sleep." He offered a small, sheepish smile to reference their night together, but Maki's expression didn't waver. Ren walked over to the kitchen drawers. He pulled it open and pulled out a solid, thick-handled stainless steel soup spoon. He held it up for her to see. "Watch!" Ren didn't brace his feet. He didn't wind up or tense his shoulders. He simply held the bowl of the spoon with his left hand, pinched the thick handle with his right thumb and index finger, and twisted. The heavy steel immediately groaned, warping and buckling under his grip like it was made of warm taffy. With a casual flick of his wrist, Ren twisted the metal handle into a tight, perfect corkscrew, then tossed the ruined utensil onto the marble counter. It clattered loudly in the quiet kitchen. Maki stared at the twisted metal. For a full 3 seconds, she completely forgot how to breathe. Her brain instantly ran the calculations. Bending a spoon wasn't a parlor trick if the metal was that thick. Twisting it into a tight coil using only 2 fingers with 0 leverage required an absurd, terrifying amount of raw kinetic force. Maki closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. She didn't say a word. She reached out, her calloused hands grabbing Ren's right forearm. Her fingers squeezed, pressing into his skin. Ren kept his arm completely relaxed, but the muscle density beneath her fingertips was undeniable. It felt exactly like her own, tightly coiled, perfectly optimized, and entirely unnatural for an ordinary human. She slid her hands up to his shoulders, then pressed her palms flat against his chest, her amber eyes wide and searching. She wasn't blushing this time. She was looking for a curse. She was looking for any trace of dark, malignant energy that might have mutated him. But there was nothing. No cursed energy spike.
No residual miasma.
Just Ren, feeling perfectly warm and solid beneath her hands. "It's just physical," Maki whispered, her voice laced with absolute disbelief. She looked up into his dark eyes. "You don't have a fever? Your bones don't ache? You don't feel like you're burning up?" "No," Ren said softly, letting his hands come up to rest lightly on her waist. "Honestly, Maki, I feel amazing. It's just really hard not to accidentally break everything I touch. What is this? Is this normal for your track club?" Maki pulled her hands back, running them through her dark green hair in pure frustration. She began to pace the short length of the kitchen, her boots clicking against the floor. "No, it is absolutely not normal," she muttered, her mind spinning as she tried to apply jujutsu logic to an impossible situation. "My condition, my strength, is a biological binding vow. It's a heavenly restriction. You are born with it. You can't just catch it like a cold." She stopped pacing and looked at him, her face suddenly draining of color before a violent, brilliant shade of crimson rushed back in to paint her cheeks and ears. Her eyes went impossibly wide as the timeline of events fully caught up to her. "Wait," Maki choked out, taking a step back and pointing an accusing, trembling finger at him. "You said this started yesterday morning, right after Right after Ren blinked, tilting his head with innocence. Right after we slept together. Keep your voice down, she hissed frantically. Even though they were the only two people in the apartment, she covered her burning face with both hands, groaning into her palms. Oh my God, I mutated my boyfriend. I actually gave you my heavenly restriction like an STD. Maki completely froze, the frantic energy draining out of her in an instant as her amber eyes locked onto his. For a long, agonizing moment, Maki just stared at him. She bit the inside of her cheek, a fierce internal war raging behind her eyes. Finally, her shoulders slumped, and the heavy, unyielding posture of the Zenin clan's rebellious daughter melted away. Maki let out a long, defeated sigh. She reached out, grabbing him by the front of his shirt. With a gentle but firm tug, she pulled him away from the kitchen counter and dragged him toward the living room. She dropped heavily onto the low green sofa, pulling Ren down so he was sitting right next to her. She didn't let go of his shirt immediately, her knuckles resting against his chest as she stared down at the floorboards, taking a deep, steadying breath before she finally started to speak. Wow. Ren leaned back against the sofa cushions, letting out a slow, heavy exhale as the sheer magnitude of what she had just explained settled over the room. Maki sat rigidly beside him, her jaw tightened defensively as she braced herself for him to call her crazy, or worse, to look at her like she was a monster. Instead, a slow, incredibly warm smile started to spread across Ren's face. He tilted his head, his dark eyes lighting up with a sudden, fond realization. Wait a second, Ren murmured, shifting his weight to turn fully toward her. All those times you pulled away, all the times you made up excuses about being too tired from track practice. Were you not trying to be intimate with me because you were terrified your super cool super strength would accidentally crush me? Maki's breath hitched. The blood immediately rushed to her face, painting her cheeks and ears a brilliant, violent crimson. What? No, that's not. She sputtered, her tough, uncompromising sorcerer persona completely short-circuiting at being called out so accurately. Don't call it super cool. And I wasn't terrified, you idiot. I was just... Maki? Ren interrupted softly, his voice thick with genuine affection. How sweet. Shut up. I will actually punch you. Ren didn't give her a chance to finish the threat. He reached out, his hand gently cupping the side of her blazing red face, and pulled her in. He captured her lips in a deep, genuine kiss that instantly silenced her protests. Maki gasped softly against his mouth, her hands instinctively flying up to grip his shoulders. For a second, her brain tried to resist, but the absolute warmth and acceptance in his kiss completely overwhelmed her. Her tense shoulders melted, and she let out a quiet, defeated sigh, her fingers curling into his shirt as she kissed him back. When the kiss finally broke, neither of them pulled away completely. Ren shifted his weight, letting his head drop sideways to rest comfortably against her shoulder. He let out a quiet, contented exhale, his arms loosely wrapping around her waist as if having his entire reality shattered was just a minor bump in their evening. So, Ren murmured, his voice rumbling softly against her collarbone. What exactly do we do now? Do I need to buy a cool, oversized weapon case like yours? Or should we just hope I don't accidentally break the door or something? Maki let out a long, heavy sigh. Her hand naturally came up to rest at the back of his neck, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the short, dark hair at his nape. The teasing was a welcome relief, and the warmth of his acceptance felt like a massive weight lifting off her chest. But her mind was already rapidly calculating the grim reality of their situation. The protective, civilian bubble she had kept him in for a year was permanently popped. He now possessed a heavenly restriction. Even if he couldn't see curses, his sheer physical density and the kinetic force he could generate would eventually draw the wrong kind of attention. trouble would find him. And worse, if the conservative higher-ups of the Jujutsu world or her own wretched family, the Zenin clan, found out that a random civilian had somehow contracted an impossible superhuman anomaly, they would treat him like a lab rat, dissect him just to see how it worked. She couldn't protect him 24 hours a day, not while balancing missions and the impending Goodwill event. There was only one place in all of Japan where he would be absolutely, completely untouchable. Tokyo Jujutsu High. Specifically, he would be under the direct protection of Satoru Gojo. The higher-ups wouldn't dare touch a single hair on Ren's head if Gojo claimed him as a special ward or a prospective student. The strongest sorcerer in the world was the ultimate deterrent. Maki squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of heat rising to her cheeks for an entirely different reason. Taking him to the school meant exposing everything. Panda would never, ever let her live it down. Nobara would relentlessly interrogate him about their dating life. She shook her head, burying the last remnants of her stubborn pride. None of that mattered. A few months of Gojo's annoying teasing was a microscopic price to pay to ensure nobody laid a finger on Ren. Keeping him safe was the only thing that mattered now. "I can't leave you out here by yourself anymore," Maki said quietly, her voice firming up with the unyielding resolve of a leader. "If you don't know how to control your output, you're going to accidentally hurt yourself or someone else. And if the wrong people in my world find out about you before we establish a solid cover story, it's going to be bad." Ren lifted his head from her shoulder, looking at her with wide, perfectly crafted apprehension. "So, what's the plan, boss?"
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.